The winter morning of 1177 BC witnessed one of ancient history's most desperate naval battles as Egyptian warships faced a massive fleet of mysterious invaders in the Nile Delta's narrow waterways. Pharaoh Ramses III watched from elevated command positions as his forces engaged enemies who had already destroyed every major civilization from Anatolia to the Levant. These weren't ordinary raiders seeking plunder. They came with families, livestock, and household goods, entire populations fleeing catastrophe, seeking new lands to settle. The Egyptians called them the Sea Peoples, and they had just spent 50 years obliterated the Bronze Age world. How did it come to this? Just decades earlier, the Mediterranean had reached its apex. Three great empires dominated the landscape: the Hittites, controlling Anatolia, Mycenaean Greeks commanding the Aegean, and New Kingdom Egypt extending from Nubia to the Euphrates. Magnificent palaces administered complex bureaucracies, trade networks connected distant regions, bronze weapons equipped professional armies, literacy flourished, prosperity seemed endless. Then it all collapsed. Between 1200 and 1150 BC, over 90% of Bronze Age cities were destroyed or abandoned. Hattusa, the Hittite capital, was systematically burned and never reoccupied. Pylos fell so suddenly that scribes left tablets unfinished. Ugarit, the cosmopolitan trading hub, was obliterated so completely that its destruction layer still shows intense fire damage 3 millennia later. Mycenae's Cyclopean walls couldn't save it. Troy burned. Cyprus suffered repeated attacks. The Levantine coast witnessed systematic devastation. Entire civilizations vanished within a single generation. Who were these sea peoples who appeared in Egyptian records bearing strange names? Peliset, Jekka, Shekelesh, Shurden, Denian, Weshesh. Where did they come from? Were they desperate refugees fleeing disaster, or coordinated raiders exploiting Bronze Age weakness? Did climate change drive them from their homelands? Did systems collapse create cascading failures? The answers remain frustratingly elusive despite over a century of archaeological investigation and scholarly debate. What we know is this: they came by sea and by land, bringing technologies and traditions from the collapsing Bronze Age world. They fought massive battles against Egypt, the only major power to survive intact. Some were defeated and disappeared from history. Others settled in new lands, transforming from mysterious raiders into the Philistines, Phoenicians, and other peoples who would shape the Iron Age Mediterranean. This is the story of the greatest collapse in ancient history, when Bronze Age civilization died and the Sea Peoples emerged from its ashes. The story begins not with invasion, but with the brilliant civilization that would soon face annihilation. Because to understand the catastrophe, we must first understand what was lost. The 14th and 13th centuries BC witnessed the Mediterranean world at unprecedented heights. The Hittite Empire controlled Anatolia and northern Syria from their capital at Hattusa, a sprawling city covering 180 hectares, protected by massive stone walls featuring elaborate gate structures decorated with carved lions and warriors. Archaeological excavations reveal sophisticated urban planning with separate districts for royal citadels, temples, and administrative buildings connected by paved streets and supplied by advanced water management systems, including underground channels and reservoirs. Hittite military power rested on professional warriors equipped with bronze weapons, supported by vassal state contingents. Their chariot forces represented Bronze Age mobile warfare's pinnacle: lightweight wooden frames reinforced with bronze fittings, spoked wheels designed for maneuverability, typically crewed by 2 warriors. Infantry included heavy troops carrying bronze-tipped spears, rectangular shields, and bronze-scale armor, while light troops served as skirmishers and archers. The administrative system, preserved in thousands of cuneiform tablets, reveals highly organized state apparatus. The king served as supreme military commander and high priest, supported by nobles, provincial governors, and local administrators. Treaties with vassal states followed standardized formats outlining mutual obligations, tribute requirements, and military assistance clauses. Mycenaean Greece extended influence across the Aegean islands, coastal Anatolia, and parts of the eastern Mediterranean. Political organization centered on fortified palace complexes serving as administrative, religious, and economic centers. Pylos under Onax Nestor controlled southwestern Peloponnese from a palace housing extensive Linear B script archives detailing sophisticated bureaucracy, managing land tenure, taxation, religious offerings, and craft production with remarkable precision. The palace covered approximately 2 hectares, featuring distinctive megaron halls with central hearths surrounded by 4 columns. Frescoes depicting processions, hunting scenes, and mythological subjects decorated walls while painted plaster-covered floors. Storage areas contained hundreds of stirrup jars for oil and wine, bronze vessels, ivory objects, and weapons indicating both local production and extensive trade connections. Tiryns demonstrated military engineering capabilities with citadel walls constructed from massive limestone blocks weighing several tons, reaching heights up to 8 meters, enclosing approximately 20,000 square meters. These fortifications incorporated corbelled galleries, sally ports, and complex entrance systems designed to channel attackers through multiple choke points. Mycenaean maritime networks extended throughout the eastern Mediterranean, with evidence of Greek traders and settlers found across Cyprus, the Levantine coast, and southern Italy. Mycenaean pottery, particularly stirrup jars and kylikes, appears archaeologically from Sardinia to the Euphrates, indicating extensive commercial activities. Trade involved not only finished goods but raw materials, copper from Cyprus, tin from possibly Anatolia or Central Europe, gold from Egypt and Nubia, amber from the Baltic. New Kingdom Egypt during the reigns of Amenhotep, Akhenaten, and Ramesses II represented the culmination of pharaonic power. The empire stretched from the fourth cataract of the Nile in Nubia to the Euphrates River in Syria, requiring sophisticated administrative systems balancing central control with local autonomy, military forces defending extended frontiers, and economic mechanisms extracting and redistributing resources across thousands of kilometers. Egyptian military forces had evolved into professional armies equipped with latest Bronze Age technology. Chariot corps formed elite striking arms with vehicles manufactured in royal workshops using imported wood, bronze fittings, and leather components. Egyptian chariots typically carried 2 crew members, driver and archer, organized into squadrons of 10 vehicles. Infantry divisions theoretically containing 5,000 men recruited from both Egyptian populations and foreign auxiliaries including Nubians, Libyans, and various Asiatic peoples. Bronze weapons reached extraordinary sophistication, producing swords displaying complex metallurgical techniques, including pattern welding, differential hardening, and decorative inlays. Military equipment included composite bows penetrating bronze armor at ranges exceeding 200 meters, bronze-tipped arrows with specialized heads, and siege equipment adapted from Asiatic models. But beneath this prosperity, subtle warnings were appearing, signs that would soon explode into catastrophe. Cyprus emerged as crucial intermediary in Mediterranean trade, particularly copper production and distribution. The island's abundant copper deposits concentrated in the Troodos Mountains supplied raw material for bronze production throughout the region. Major centers like Nkomi and Kition developed into sophisticated urban settlements with planned street layouts, substantial buildings, and specialized craft production. Oxhide copper ingots shaped distinctively and weighing approximately 25–30 kilograms each have been found in shipwrecks and archaeological sites from Sardinia to the Black Sea, demonstrating the extent of the island's commercial influence. The Levantine coast featured numerous prosperous city-states serving as intermediaries between great powers, and conduits for long-distance trade. Ugarit on the Syrian coast exemplified this role through its cosmopolitan character and extensive commercial networks. The city's archives, written in multiple languages and scripts, Ugaritic, Akkadian, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Hittite cuneiform, reflect its position as a meeting point of civilizations. Ugaritic merchants maintained trading houses in Cyprus, Egypt, and the Aegean, while the city's port handled goods ranging from Baltic amber to Indian Ocean pearls. Ugarit's urban layout demonstrated advanced planning with distinct residential, commercial, and religious quarters connected by stone-paved streets. The royal palace covered over 6,000 square meters, containing more than 90 rooms, including throne rooms, private apartments, administrative offices, and storage facilities. The religious complex included temples dedicated to Baal and Dagon with elaborate ritual installations and rich votive deposits. Private houses in wealthy residential districts featured multiple stories, interior courtyards, and sophisticated drainage systems. Bronze working techniques had evolved to produce alloys with specific properties for different applications, from hard cutting edges for weapons and tools to corrosion-resistant fittings for ships and architectural elements. Foundries at sites like Kition in Cyprus and Enkomi produced standardized copper ingots using advanced smelting techniques, maximizing yield while minimizing fuel consumption. The Uluburan shipwreck dating to around 1300 BC provides detailed evidence of late Bronze Age maritime capabilities. The vessel, approximately 15 meters in length, carried cargo weighing over 20 tons, including copper and tin ingots, glass ingots, ivory, ebony, ostrich eggshells, and various manufactured goods from across the known world. Ship construction featured cedar planking joined with mortise and tenon joints, reinforced with bronze fastenings, and sealed with pine resin. Agricultural intensification supported population growth and urbanization. Terracing systems in the Aegean islands, irrigation networks in the Near East, and flood management systems along the Nile enabled increased food production, freeing labor for specialized crafts, military service, and administrative functions. Storage facilities at palace centers could hold supplies sufficient for several years, providing security against harvest failures. The archaeological record reveals unprecedented material prosperity and cultural sophistication. Luxury goods, including gold jewelry, ivory carvings, decorated textiles, and elaborate furniture, appear in elite contexts throughout the Mediterranean. Artistic styles showed increasing international influence, with Egyptian motifs appearing in Mycenaean frescoes, Aegean pottery forms adopted in the Levant, and Mesopotamian cylinder seals found in Greek contexts. Temple complexes featured elaborate ritual installations, substantial treasuries, and extensive land holdings, making them significant economic as well as religious institutions. The international character of late Bronze Age religion appeared in adoption of foreign deities, syncretic practices, and exchange of religious texts and iconography between different cultural regions. Yet beneath this veneer of prosperity and cooperation, subtle signs of instability began manifesting during the final decades of the 13th century BC. These initial warnings, scattered across different regions and preserved in fragmentary records, would prove harbingers of catastrophic collapse, reshaping the ancient world. The storm was gathering, and when it broke, it would destroy everything. The first documented evidence of trouble appears in Hittite royal archives, where references to conflicts with Western Anatolian peoples become increasingly frequent and urgent after 1250 BC. Hittite King Tudhaliya IV faced mounting pressure along his empire's western frontiers, where a confederation of Anatolian peoples known collectively as the Asua lands had begun challenging imperial authority. These territories, stretching along the Aegean coast of Anatolia from the Troad in the north to Lycia in the south, had previously served as loyal vassals, providing tribute and military assistance to Hattusa. However, archaeological evidence from sites like Troy, Miletus, and Iassos reveals increasing fortification efforts, suggesting growing insecurity and preparation for conflict. Hittite military records describe campaigns against rebellious Western vassals with unprecedented detail, indicating the seriousness of these threats. The Yalbert inscription carved on a rock relief near modern Konya commemorates Tudhaliya's victories over the Luka people and their allies, describing pitched battles involving thousands of warriors and capture of numerous fortified settlements. The text mentions specific tactical formations, siege techniques, and deployment of chariot squadrons in mountainous terrain previously considered unsuitable for such operations. These Western Anatolian conflicts differed significantly from earlier Hittite military campaigns in their intensity and geographical scope. Previous rebellions typically involved single city-states or small regional coalitions, but late 13th century disturbances encompassed vast territories and involved coordinated resistance across multiple ethnic groups. Hittite administrative documents reveal emergency measures including mobilization of reserve forces, construction of new fortifications along vulnerable frontiers, and establishment of military colonies in strategic locations. Archaeological excavations at Hittite frontier sites provide material evidence of increased militarization. The fortress of Kushakla on the Euphrates shows extensive renovation during the late 13th century, with existing walls heightened and reinforced, new towers added at regular intervals, and internal structures modified to accommodate larger garrisons. Similar patterns appear at sites throughout western and southern Anatolia, suggesting coordinated imperial response to mounting external pressures. The situation in western Anatolia culminated in destruction of Troy, Seventh around 1180 BC, an event capturing scholarly attention for over a century. This settlement, built on ruins of earlier Troy's sixth, represented a significant urban center controlling the strategic Dardanelles passage between Europe and Asia. Archaeological evidence reveals a community under siege with narrow streets packed with storage jars, makeshift shelters constructed within citadel walls, and clear signs of overcrowding as population sought protection behind massive fortifications. The destruction layer contains extensive fire damage, collapsed building materials, and scattered human remains, suggesting violent conquest rather than accidental conflagration. Arrowheads of various types, including some with distinctive barbed points, not typical of local Anatolian traditions, lie embedded in walls and scattered across floors. Bronze weapons and tools show evidence of hasty abandonment, with valuable items left behind suggesting owners fled or perished during attack. Carl Blegen's excavations in the 1930s and subsequent investigations by Manfred Kaufmann's team reveal that Troy, a Sevener, had been rebuilt hastily after destruction of Troy's sixth around 1300 BC. The new settlement utilized existing fortification walls but showed signs of decline in construction quality and urban planning. Houses were smaller and more cramped, streets narrower and less regularly laid out, creating impression of community struggling to maintain former prosperity. The pottery assemblage from Troy Seventh's destruction level includes both local Anatolian wares and imported pieces from various Aegean sources, indicating continued trade connections despite apparent military pressures. However, the quantity and quality of imported goods had declined significantly compared to earlier periods, suggesting economic disruption preceding final catastrophe. Storage areas within the citadel contained large quantities of grain and other foodstuffs, evidence of preparation for extended siege conditions. Contemporary with troubles in western Anatolia, Egyptian and Levantine sources document increasing raids and population movements along eastern Mediterranean coasts. The first clear references to seaborne raiders appear in Egyptian records from the reign of Meneptah, who faced coalition of Libyan tribes and foreign peoples attempting to settle in the Nile Delta. The crisis was accelerating, and Egypt was about to face its first test. The Karnak inscription describing Merneptah's victory mentions specific groups including the Luka, Shekelesh, and Teresh, peoples whose origins lay in the Aegean and Anatolian regions experiencing simultaneous upheavals. These early raiding groups differed from later Sea Peoples' invasions in their apparent coordination with established regional powers. The Libyan pharaoh Mare had formed alliances with various foreign contingents, suggesting initial population movements involved organized military cooperation rather than desperate refugee migrations. Egyptian battle reliefs from Merneptah's mortuary temple show foreign warriors equipped with distinctive round shields, feathered headdresses, and bronze weapons, fighting alongside Libyan forces in coordinated formations. Archaeological sites from this period reveal increasing evidence of violent destruction and abandonment. Enkomi on Cyprus, the island's principal copper-producing center, shows signs of repeated attacks during the late 13th century, with destruction layers containing burned buildings, scattered metalworking equipment, and hordes of valuable objects hastily buried. The site's final occupation level includes makeshift fortifications constructed from reused building stones, suggesting desperate attempts to defend against persistent threats. The copper industry that made Cyprus wealthy began showing signs of disruption. Smelting installations at major sites like Kition and Kalavassos were abandoned or operated at reduced capacity, while standardized oxide ingot production that had characterized Cypriot metallurgy for centuries became irregular in both quality and quantity. Trade routes connecting Cyprus to markets throughout the Mediterranean experienced increasing disruption, as evidenced by declining distribution of Cypriot pottery and metalwork in foreign archaeological contexts. Ugarit's extensive archives provide detailed contemporary accounts of growing crisis affecting the Levantine coast. Letters between the last king of Ugarit, Hammurapi, and his overlord the Hittite king reveal mounting pressure from seaborne raiders and internal security problems. One particularly revealing document describes departure of Ugarit's military forces to assist the Hittites in Anatolia, leaving the city vulnerable to attack from the sea. Hammurapi's correspondence expresses growing desperation as reports of raids and destruction reached him from neighboring territories. Administrative records from Ugarit's final period show significant changes in economic activity and social organization. Tax collection became irregular with numerous references to unpaid obligations and requests for deadline extensions. Trade contracts decreased in both number and scope, while legal documents reveal increasing disputes over property rights and commercial obligations. The city's cosmopolitan character, previously reflected in multilingual archives, began giving way to more localized concerns as international connections weakened. Archaeological evidence from Ugarit's destruction around 1185 BC reveals catastrophe striking without warning. The royal palace and surrounding administrative buildings were consumed by fire, with cuneiform tablets baked hard by intense heat, preserving final records. Personal belongings scattered throughout residential areas suggest hasty evacuation, while absence of systematic looting indicates attackers were more interested in destruction than plunder. Climate researchers have identified significant environmental changes during the late 13th century BC that may have contributed to regional instability. Paleoclimatic data from various sources, including tree ring studies from Anatolian junipers, pollen analysis from eastern Mediterranean lake sediments, and isotopic analysis from Levantine caves, indicates period of increasing aridity and temperature fluctuations beginning around 1250 BC. The Anatolian tree ring chronology reveals series of narrow growth rings corresponding to drought conditions during late 13th century, with particularly severe episodes around 1230 and 1200 BC. These drought periods would have severely impacted agricultural production in regions dependent on rainfall, forcing populations to seek alternative territories or food sources. The timing of these climatic episodes corresponds closely with archaeological evidence of increased fortification and conflict throughout the region. Lake-level reconstructions from sites across eastern Mediterranean show significant drops during this period, indicating reduced precipitation and increased evaporation rates. Lake Tiberias in the Jordan Valley experienced marked lowering of water levels, while similar patterns appear in lakes throughout Anatolia and the northern Levant. These hydrological changes would have affected both agricultural productivity and availability of fresh water for growing urban populations. The perfect storm was forming: climate change, agricultural failure, political instability, and population movements. The Bronze Age world was about to collapse. Agricultural disruption resulting from climate change appears to have triggered population movements that initially took the form of organized raids rather than mass migrations. Communities facing crop failures and livestock losses would have been forced to seek resources elsewhere, either through trade, tribute extraction, or direct seizure. The warrior cultures of the Aegean and Western Anatolia possessed both military capability and maritime technology necessary to pursue such strategies across considerable distances. Evidence for famine conditions comes from various archaeological and textual sources. Grain storage facilities at sites throughout the region show signs of depletion, with large storage jars found empty or containing only residual traces. Skeletal remains from cemetery sites reveal increased incidence of nutritional stress markers, including linear enamel hyperplasia and reduced stature, indicating prolonged periods of dietary inadequacy. The disruption of established trade networks exacerbated local food shortages by preventing redistribution of surpluses from unaffected regions. Cyprus, which had relied heavily on imported grain to support its specialized copper-producing economy, faced particular difficulties as traditional suppliers in Egypt and the Levant experienced their own agricultural problems. The island's archaeological record shows increasing evidence of food storage and rationing during this period, with residential areas containing unusually large numbers of storage vessels. Hittite administrative documents reveal attempts to address food shortages through emergency measures, including redistribution of temple grain reserves, suspension of tribute obligations for affected territories, and negotiation of grain imports from Egypt. However, these measures appear to have provided only temporary relief, as references to famine conditions continue throughout the final decades of Hittite rule. The combination of climate change, agricultural disruption, and resulting population pressures created conditions that transformed localized conflicts into regional crises. Communities that had previously coexisted peacefully found themselves competing for diminishing resources, while breakdown of established trade relationships eliminated traditional mechanisms for resolving such disputes. The sophisticated diplomatic and economic systems that maintained stability throughout the late Bronze Age proved inadequate to address challenges of this magnitude and geographic scope. The mounting pressures that had been building throughout the late 13th century BC reached their devastating climax in the period between 1200 and 1150 BC as a cascade of destruction swept across the eastern Mediterranean with unprecedented speed and thoroughness. The sophisticated urban centers that had anchored Bronze Age civilization for centuries fell one after another. Their palaces consumed by flames, their populations scattered, and their administrative systems obliterated. This systematic collapse left behind an archaeological signature so distinctive that modern excavators can identify the destruction layers with remarkable precision, revealing the extent and intensity of the catastrophe that befell the ancient world. Pylos, the administrative heart of southwestern Greece under 1x Nestor, provides perhaps the most dramatic evidence of this sudden collapse. The palace complex, which had functioned as the region's political, economic, and religious center for generations, was destroyed around 1180 BC in a conflagration so intense that it baked the Linear B tablets in the administrative archives, inadvertently preserving them for modern scholars. The final tablets from the palace reveal a state apparatus still functioning normally until the very end, with records of religious offerings, military equipment distributions, and routine administrative matters dated to the final months before destruction. Archaeological excavation of the Pylos destruction layer reveals violence and haste of the final assault. Bronze weapons lie scattered throughout palace corridors, including spearheads embedded in door frames and arrowheads found in storage areas where defenders made last stands. The throne room megaron shows evidence of intense burning with collapsed roof timbers, creating charcoal layer over a meter thick in some areas. Fragments of decorated fresco bearing scorch marks lie mixed with broken pottery and twisted bronze vessels throughout the ruins. The administrative wing provides particularly poignant evidence of the catastrophe's suddenness. Scribes' workstations contain unfinished tablets with stylus marks still visible, while clay ceilings remain scattered across floors where they fell from burning wooden shelves. Storage areas that once contained extensive archives show signs of systematic destruction, with tablet fragments mixed with ash and debris in patterns suggesting deliberate vandalism rather than accidental fire damage. The end came swiftly, and it came for everyone. Personal belongings found throughout the palace complex indicate that inhabitants had no opportunity for organized evacuation. Bronze mirrors, ivory combs, and gold jewelry lie abandoned in residential areas, while cooking vessels still containing carbonized food. Remains suggest that daily life continued normally until the moment of attack. Children's toys, including small bronze animals and ceramic figurines scattered throughout domestic quarters, provide haunting testimony to families caught completely unprepared for disaster that overwhelmed them. The surrounding settlement at Pylos shows similar evidence of violent destruction, with residential areas containing burned houses, scattered possessions, and hastily buried hoards of valuables. Several caches of bronze objects, including weapons, tools, and vessels, were discovered in locations suggesting their owners intended to return and retrieve them once danger had passed. The systematic nature of destruction affecting both Palace Center and surrounding communities simultaneously indicates coordinated assault by forces capable of overwhelming the region's defensive capabilities. Tiryns, with its massive Cyclopean fortifications, might have been expected to withstand attacks that destroyed less well-defended sites, yet it too fell victim to the general catastrophe. The citadel's destruction around 1200 BC reveals that even the most sophisticated defensive systems of the Bronze Age proved inadequate against forces unleashed during this period. The palace complex within fortress walls was thoroughly burned, with destruction debris reaching depths of several meters in some areas. Evidence from Tiryns suggests attackers possessed detailed knowledge of the fortress's defensive weaknesses. Breaches in Cyclopean walls occur at points where massive stone blocks were joined with smaller stones, indicating assault was conducted by forces familiar with Bronze Age fortification techniques. The complex entrance system designed to channel attackers through multiple choke points shows signs of having been bypassed or overcome through coordinated assault tactics. The lower citadel at Tiryns contains evidence of desperate defensive preparations undertaken as crisis approached. Residential buildings near walls were demolished to create clear fields of fire, while stone foundations were incorporated into hastily constructed additional defensive works. Storage areas throughout the fortress were packed with supplies, including large quantities of arrows, spear points, and bronze armor pieces, suggesting defenders had time to prepare for siege conditions but ultimately proved unable to withstand final assault. Hattusa, the great capital of the Hittite Empire, suffered perhaps the most complete destruction of any Bronze Age center. The city's abandonment around 1180 BC marked not just the fall of a single settlement, but the collapse of an entire imperial system that had dominated Anatolia and northern Syria for centuries. Archaeological evidence reveals that Hattusa was systematically destroyed, and then deliberately abandoned with its population apparently evacuating in organized fashion before final conflagration. The royal citadel at Hattusa shows signs of careful preparation for abandonment with valuable objects removed and archives apparently transferred elsewhere before destruction. However, administrative buildings and temples were thoroughly burned, creating destruction layers containing thousands of cuneiform tablets that provide detailed insights into the empire's final period. These documents reveal increasing military pressures, economic difficulties, and administrative breakdown in years preceding the capital's fall. The great temple complexes at Hattusa were subjected to particularly systematic destruction. Temple 1, the largest religious structure in the Hittite world, was stripped of valuable fittings before being burned with bronze cult objects and precious metal decorations apparently removed by departing population. Temple storage areas, which had contained vast quantities of grain, oil, and other offerings, were found empty except for scattered pottery fragments, carbonized organic remains. Residential areas throughout Hattusa reveal pattern of organized evacuation followed by deliberate destruction. Houses contained few personal belongings, suggesting inhabitants had time to gather possessions before departing, yet buildings themselves were thoroughly burned. The pattern indicates cities' abandonment was planned and executed by its own population rather than resulting from sudden conquest by external forces. The water supply systems that had made Hattusa's large population possible were deliberately sabotaged during abandonment. Underground channels were blocked with stones and debris, while surface installations were damaged beyond easy repair. These actions suggest evacuating population intended to prevent the site's reoccupation by hostile forces, effectively denying strategic advantages that had made Hattusa an imperial capital. The Hittite Empire, superpower for centuries, simply ceased to exist, its capital abandoned, its archives silent, its people vanished into the chaos. Ugarit's destruction around 1185 BC eliminated one of the most cosmopolitan and economically important centers of the late Bronze Age world. The city's position as intermediary between great powers and its extensive commercial networks made its loss particularly significant for broader Mediterranean civilization collapse. Archaeological evidence reveals that Ugarit, like other major centers, was destroyed suddenly and completely, with no signs of gradual decline or partial abandonment. The royal palace at Ugarit was consumed by fire so intense that bronze objects melted and fused with stone architectural elements. The palace's extensive archives, containing thousands of tablets in multiple languages and scripts, were baked hard by heat, preserving diplomatic correspondence, commercial contracts, and administrative records that provide unique insights into the international system's final period. The last letters found in archives describe urgent requests for military assistance and reports of seaborne raiders approaching the coast. Ugarit's destruction was accompanied by systematic dismantling of its commercial infrastructure. Harbor installations were damaged with stone blocks from quays and warehouses scattered by what appears to have been deliberate demolition. The city's metalworking quarter, which had produced bronze objects for export throughout the Mediterranean, shows evidence of hasty evacuation, with furnaces abandoned while still containing partially processed materials. The residential areas reveal the same pattern of sudden catastrophe found at other destroyed sites. Houses contain scattered possessions, overturned furniture, and evidence of fire damage, while streets are littered with pottery fragments and other debris. Several hoards of valuable objects, including silver vessels, jewelry, and bronze weapons, were discovered buried in residential areas, indicating some inhabitants had time to conceal wealth before fleeing or perishing. Archaeological surveys throughout the eastern Mediterranean reveal that destruction of major centers was accompanied by abandonment of hundreds of smaller settlements. In Greece, over 90% of Mycenaean sites show evidence of destruction or abandonment during the period between 1200 and 1150 BC. This pattern extends beyond major palace centers to include small towns, rural settlements, and specialized sites such as metalworking centers and religious sanctuaries. The systematic nature of this widespread abandonment suggests coordinated attacks by forces capable of operating across vast distances and diverse terrains. Coastal sites were particularly vulnerable, with evidence of seaborne attacks found at locations throughout the Aegean Islands, coastal Anatolia, and the Levantine littoral. However, inland sites also suffered destruction, indicating attackers possessed both maritime and terrestrial military capabilities. Evidence of hasty burial practices appears at sites throughout affected regions, with valuable objects concealed in locations suggesting owners intended to return and retrieve them once danger had passed. These hoards typically contain bronze weapons and tools, precious metal objects, and sometimes raw materials such as copper ingots or silver bars. The widespread distribution of such hoards and their similar composition patterns suggests communities throughout the region faced similar threats and responded with similar defensive strategies. The collapse of administrative systems is evident in sudden cessation of written records at sites throughout affected areas. Linear B tablets from Greek sites end abruptly around 1200 BC, while cuneiform archives from Anatolian and Levantine centers show similar termination dates. This loss of literacy had profound consequences for transmission of knowledge, administrative practices, and cultural traditions that had developed over centuries of Bronze Age civilization. Trade networks that had connected communities across thousands of kilometers disintegrated rapidly following destruction of major centers. Archaeological evidence shows sharp decline in distribution of goods that had previously circulated widely, including Cypriot copper, Aegean pottery, Egyptian gold objects, and Mesopotamian cylinder seals. This commercial collapse forced communities to become more self-sufficient, leading to technological regression in areas that had previously relied on specialized production and long-distance exchange. The breakdown of centralized authority systems led to fragmentation of previously unified territories into isolated communities. In Greece, unified Mycenaean palace states gave way to small, independent settlements with limited territorial control. Archaeological evidence shows dramatic reduction in site sizes, with post-destruction settlements typically covering only a fraction of their Bronze Age predecessors' areas. Population levels declined dramatically throughout affected regions, with demographic estimates suggesting reductions of 75% or more in many areas. This population collapse resulted from a combination of warfare casualties, disease, famine, and large-scale migration as communities fled their traditional territories in search of security and resources. The Bronze Age world had fallen, but Egypt still stood, and it was about to face the full fury of the Sea Peoples. The chaos consuming the eastern Mediterranean during the late 13th century BC reached Egyptian shores during the 5th regnal year of Pharaoh Ramses, when a massive coalition of Libyan tribes and foreign warriors launched unprecedented assault on the Nile Delta. And this invasion marked the first documented large-scale encounter between Egypt and peoples who would later be collectively known as the Sea Peoples, establishing patterns of conflict that would define Egyptian foreign policy for the next century. The threat emerged from the western desert, where Libyan chieftain Merai had assembled confederation, combining traditional North African pastoral warriors with seaborne raiders from the collapsing Aegean and Anatolian worlds. Merneptah ascended to the throne as an elderly man, having served as crown prince under his father Ramses II for decades before assuming power. His reign began during a period of relative stability, with Egypt's borders secure and the empire's administrative system functioning effectively after territorial consolidations achieved during the previous century. The new pharaoh inherited military establishment that had been reorganized and re-equipped during later years of Ramses III's reign, incorporating lessons learned from conflicts with Hittites and various Asiatic peoples. However, nothing in Egypt's previous military experience had prepared the kingdom for the scale and nature of threat that would emerge from Western approaches. The Libyan Confederation that challenged Egyptian authority represented fundamental departure from traditional patterns of desert warfare. Previous conflicts with Libyan tribes had typically involved relatively small-scale raiding parties seeking livestock, captives, or temporary access to Nile Valley resources during drought periods. And these encounters, while sometimes requiring significant military responses, had generally been contained within established frameworks of frontier defense and diplomatic negotiation. The coalition assembled by Murray, however, possessed both numerical strength and organizational sophistication necessary to threaten Egypt's territorial integrity in ways not seen since the Second Intermediate Period. Archaeological evidence from sites along Egypt's western frontier reveals extensive preparations for coming conflict. Fortress installations at locations like Zawiyet el-Rakum, constructed during reign of Ramesses II, were reinforced and expanded during Merneptah's early years. These defensive works incorporated advanced military engineering techniques, including overlapping fields of fire from archer positions, multiple gate systems designed to channel attackers into killing zones, and underground storage facilities capable of sustaining garrisons during extended sieges. The scale of these fortifications indicates Egyptian military planners anticipated threats significantly more serious than traditional Libyan raids. The composition of Murray's coalition revealed interconnected nature of crisis affecting entire eastern Mediterranean world. Alongside traditional Libyan tribal contingents from the Meshwesh and other Western peoples, the Confederation included substantial numbers of foreign warriors bearing distinctive equipment and fighting techniques that marked them as originating from collapsing civilizations of the Aegean and Anatolia. Egyptian artistic depictions of these foreign contingents provide detailed visual evidence of their appearance, weaponry, and tactical organization, offering crucial insights into nature of population movements reshaping the ancient world. The Merneptah stele discovered at Thebes and now housed in Egyptian Museum in Cairo provides most comprehensive contemporary account of conflict and its participants. This granite monument, standing over 3 meters tall and covered with hieroglyphic inscriptions, describes invasion and Egypt's victorious response in language, combining traditional pharaonic boasting with surprisingly specific details about enemy forces and course of campaign. The stele identifies specific foreign groups within coalition, providing first clear documentary evidence for peoples who would continue to challenge Egyptian authority for generations. According to the stele's account, the Libyan coalition included contingents of Ekwesh, described as warriors equipped with bronze swords and round shields who fought in close formation. These fighters are depicted wearing distinctive kilts and carrying weapons differing significantly from traditional Egyptian or Libyan equipment. Their tactical employment, as described in Egyptian battle accounts, involved coordinated charges designed to break enemy formations through shock action, a technique suggesting military traditions derived from Aegean or Anatolian warfare practices. The Teresh contingent presented different challenges for Egyptian defenders. And these warriors are described as expert archers and skirmishers who employed hit-and-run tactics designed to disrupt Egyptian formations before melting away into difficult terrain. The coalition was diverse, deadly, and desperate. Egypt was about to be tested like never before. Luka warriors already familiar to Egyptian forces from previous encounters in Anatolia during reigns of earlier pharaohs formed another significant component of coalition. These fighters brought expertise in siege warfare and mountain combat that proved particularly valuable during campaigns' later phases. Egyptian reliefs show Luka contingents equipped with scaling ladders, siege hooks, and other specialized equipment designed for assaulting fortified positions. Their inclusion in Murray's forces provided coalition with capabilities that traditional Libyan warfare had previously lacked. The Sherdun, who had appeared in Egyptian records as both enemies and allies during previous reigns, contributed naval expertise and amphibious assault capabilities to coalition. These warriors possessed advanced shipbuilding knowledge and maritime combat techniques that enabled coalition to coordinate land-based attacks with seaborne operations along Delta coast. Egyptian naval records describe encounters with Sherdun vessels equipped with bronze-reinforced rams and crewed by warriors trained in boarding actions and coastal raiding techniques. Shekelesh contingents rounded out foreign component of Murray's coalition, bringing metallurgical expertise and advanced weapon manufacturing capabilities. Archaeological evidence from campaign's aftermath includes bronze weapons and tools bearing distinctive technological signatures that can be traced to Shekelesh production techniques. These artifacts reveal sophisticated alloying practices and heat treatment methods that produced weapons superior in many respects to traditional Egyptian bronze work. The coalition's advance toward Nile Delta began during flooding season of Meneptah's fifth regnal year, when annual inundation typically provided Egypt with natural defensive advantages. However, Murray's forces demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Egyptian seasonal patterns by timing their approach to coincide with periods when floodwaters would restrict Egyptian mobility while providing invaders with alternative routes through normally impassable terrain. This strategic timing suggests coalition possessed detailed intelligence about Egyptian defensive arrangements and seasonal vulnerabilities. Egyptian frontier scouts first reported coalition's approach near Oasis of Siwa, where advanced elements had established supply bases and conducted reconnaissance operations. These initial contacts revealed unprecedented scale of threat, with estimates placing coalition's total strength at over 20,000 warriors plus substantial numbers of non-combatants, including families, livestock, and baggage trains. The presence of women, children, and household goods indicated this was not merely raiding expedition, but genuine migration seeking permanent settlement in Egyptian territory. Merneptah's response to crisis demonstrated both strengths and limitations of New Kingdom military organization. The pharaoh ordered mobilization of Egypt's professional military forces, including chariot squadrons from Memphis and Thebes, infantry divisions recruited from Upper and Lower Egypt, and auxiliary units drawn from Nubian and other allied populations. This mobilization required several months to complete, during which coalition continued its advance toward Delta's western approaches. The Egyptian military machine that assembled to meet this threat represented culmination of centuries of military development and organizational refinement. Chariot forces formed elite striking arm with vehicles manufactured in royal workshops using finest materials available. Each chariot carried crew of 2, a driver responsible for vehicle control and tactical maneuvering, and a warrior equipped with composite bow, bronze-tipped arrows, and backup weapons for close combat. The chariots themselves featured lightweight wooden frames reinforced with bronze fittings, spoked wheels designed for speed and maneuverability, and leather components that provided flexibility while maintaining structural integrity. Infantry formations included both heavy and light troops organized into divisions, theoretically containing 5,000 men each, though actual strengths varied considerably based on recruitment success and campaign requirements. Heavy infantry carried bronze-tipped spears, rectangular shields constructed from wood and leather, and wore bronze-scale armor that provided protection while maintaining mobility. Light infantry served as skirmishers and archers equipped with composite bows, bronze daggers, and minimal armor, emphasizing speed and flexibility over defensive capability. The decisive confrontation occurred in western Delta region near site of modern Qom el Ahmar, where geographical features channeled coalition's advance into terrain favorable for Egyptian tactical deployment. Merneptah's forces had established defensive positions that took advantage of natural obstacles while providing optimal fields of fire for archer units and clear approaches for chariot charges. The battle's location, approximately 150 kilometers from Memphis, demonstrated coalition success in penetrating deep into Egyptian territory before meeting organized resistance. Egyptian battle accounts describe multi-day engagement beginning with skirmishing between advance elements and escalating into general confrontation involving full strength of both forces. The outcome would determine Egypt's fate. The coalition's initial attacks focused on Egyptian chariot squadrons attempting to neutralize Egypt's primary tactical advantage through concentrated missile fire and coordinated infantry assaults. However, Egyptian tactical flexibility and superior coordination eventually prevailed, with chariot forces conducting flanking maneuvers that disrupted coalition formations and created opportunities for infantry advances. The battle's turning point came when Egyptian forces succeeded in isolating Murray's command group from main coalition forces. Egyptian chariots operating in coordinated squadrons penetrated coalition lines and captured or killed key leaders, including members of Murray's immediate family. This tactical success created confusion within coalition ranks and enabled Egyptian infantry to exploit gaps in enemy formations. The collapse of centralized command led to disintegration of coalition cohesion, with individual contingents attempting to withdraw independently rather than maintaining coordinated resistance. Egyptian casualty figures, as recorded in official accounts, claim minimal losses compared to devastation inflicted on coalition forces. While these numbers undoubtedly reflect propaganda requirements of royal inscriptions rather than accurate battlefield statistics, archaeological evidence from battle sites supports conclusion that Egyptian forces achieved decisive victory. Weapons and equipment scattered across battlefield include numerous examples of foreign manufacture, confirming diverse composition of Murray's coalition and international scope of conflict. The aftermath revealed true scale of coalition's ambitions and thoroughness of Egypt's victory. Egyptian forces captured over 9,000 prisoners, including substantial numbers of women and children, indicating entire communities had participated in migration attempt. Livestock herds numbering in tens of thousands were seized, along with bronze weapons, tools, and other equipment that provided valuable intelligence about coalition's origins and capabilities. The treatment of prisoners following battle demonstrated Egyptian administrative efficiency and strategic thinking about future security requirements. Rather than executing captured warriors or selling them into slavery, Merneptah's government incorporated many into Egyptian military service, particularly those with specialized skills in metallurgy, shipbuilding, or siege warfare. This policy reflected both practical resource management and recognition that skills possessed by these foreign warriors could benefit Egyptian military capabilities. The victory's immediate consequences extended far beyond battlefield itself. Egyptian control over Western Delta was firmly re-established, with new fortress installations constructed at strategic locations to prevent future coalition attempts. The captured equipment and prisoners provided valuable intelligence about conditions in Aegean and Anatolian regions, enabling Egyptian strategic planners to better understand broader crises affecting Eastern Mediterranean world. Merneptah's triumph also had significant diplomatic ramifications throughout region. Egyptian prestige, which had suffered during later years of Ramses II's reign due to economic difficulties and administrative challenges, was dramatically restored by decisive defeat of such formidable coalition. Tributary relationships with Asiatic peoples were renewed on terms favorable to Egypt, while potential enemies throughout region were forced to recalculate assessments of Egyptian military capabilities. The identification of specific foreign groups within Murray's coalition provided Egyptian intelligence services with crucial information about population movements reshaping ancient world. The presence of Aegean and Anatolian peoples in such large numbers confirmed that destruction of Bronze Age civilizations was generating massive refugee populations seeking new territories for settlement. and this intelligence would prove invaluable during subsequent encounters with similar groups throughout Merneptah's reign and beyond. But the respite proved temporary. The Sea Peoples would return, and next time they would come in even greater numbers with better organization and more desperate determination. The lessons learned from Merneptah's encounters with Libyan coalition and their foreign allies would prove invaluable to his successor Ramesses III, who ascended throne around 1186 BC to face an even more formidable challenge. During 5th and 8th years of Ramesses III's reign, coordinated assaults by Sea Peoples coalitions would test Egyptian military capabilities to their absolute limits, culminating in naval engagements that represented largest and most sophisticated maritime battles of ancient world. The stage was set for the final confrontation that would determine whether Bronze Age civilization's last great power could survive the storm that had destroyed all others. Egypt stood alone against the tide, and the greatest battle was yet to come. Ramesses III's accession occurred during a period of relative stability that masked continuing deterioration of conditions throughout Eastern Mediterranean. Egyptian intelligence networks expanded following Merneptah's victories, provided detailed reports of ongoing destruction in Anatolia, Levant, and Aegean islands. The systematic collapse of urban centers, trade networks, and political authorities in these regions generated massive population displacements that Egyptian strategic planners recognized would inevitably impact Nile Valley. Unlike his predecessor, who faced primarily land-based threats from Western Desert, Ramesses III would confront enemies possessing advanced naval capabilities and maritime combat experience gained through decades of seaborne raiding and conquest. The Sea Peoples coalition that emerged during Ramesses III's reign represented fundamental evolution from forces encountered by Merneptah. Where earlier groups had operated as auxiliary contingents within Libyan tribal confederations, the new threat consisted of organized maritime powers capable of independent strategic action across vast distances. These peoples possessed sophisticated shipbuilding technology, advanced metallurgical skills, and military traditions that combined elements from collapsed civilizations of Bronze Age world with innovations developed during their years of displacement and conflict. The Peliset emerged as most prominent and militarily capable group within this new coalition. Archaeological evidence from their eventual settlement areas in southern Levant reveals people possessing advanced urban planning knowledge, sophisticated pottery-making techniques, and metallurgical skills that produced weapons and tools superior to many contemporary examples. Their military organization incorporated elements of both Aegean and Anatolian warfare traditions, including use of iron weapons that gave them significant advantages over opponents, still relying primarily on bronze equipment. Peliset warriors, as depicted in Egyptian battle reliefs at Medinet Habu, wore distinctive feathered headdresses that became their most recognizable identifying feature. These elaborate constructions, apparently made from ostrich plumes arranged in radiating patterns, served both ceremonial and practical purposes by making individual warriors appear larger and more intimidating while providing unit identification during complex battlefield maneuvers. Their body armor consisted of bronze scale corselets worn over linen tunics with bronze greaves protecting lower legs during close combat operations. The weaponry employed by Peliset forces demonstrated technological sophistication reflecting their origins in advanced Bronze Age civilizations of Aegean and Anatolia. Their primary weapons included long, bronze swords designed for both thrusting and slashing attacks, bronze-tipped spears with reinforced wooden shafts, and round shields constructed from bronze-reinforced leather stretched over wooden frames. Archaeological examples of Peliset weapons reveal advanced metallurgical techniques, including pattern welding, differential hardening, and decorative inlays that combined functional effectiveness with artistic excellence. Peliset naval capabilities represented perhaps their most significant military asset. Their ships, reconstructed from Egyptian artistic depictions and archaeological remains from later settlement sites, featured advanced design elements that enabled long-distance voyaging and effective combat operations. These vessels typically measured 20-25 meters in length, with high prows and sterns decorated with bird head ornaments that served both religious and practical identification purposes. Ship construction utilized sophisticated joinery techniques that created flexible yet durable hulls capable of withstanding stresses of open ocean navigation and combat maneuvering. The Cheka contingent within Sea People's coalition brought specialized expertise in siege warfare and fortification techniques. Egyptian records describe Cheka warriors as particularly skilled in conducting assault operations against defended positions, employing scaling equipment, siege towers, and undermining techniques that reflected extensive experience in urban warfare. Their equipment included bronze-reinforced leather armor that provided protection while maintaining mobility necessary for assault operations, along with specialized tools designed for breaching walls and gates. The Danaan brought advanced knowledge of metallurgy and weapon manufacturing that enhanced overall military capabilities of Sea People's forces. Archaeological evidence from sites associated with Danaan settlement reveals sophisticated bronze working facilities capable of producing weapons and tools in quantities sufficient to equip large military formations. Their metallurgical techniques included advanced alloying practices that produced bronze with superior hardness and durability compared to many contemporary examples. The storm was gathering once more, and this time it would be even more terrible than before. The reshape contingents contributed expertise in amphibious warfare and coastal raiding operations that proved crucial during coalition's assault on Nile Delta. These warriors possessed detailed knowledge of tidal patterns, coastal geography, and beach assault techniques that enabled coordinated attacks combining naval and land forces. Their ships featured shallow drafts and reinforced construction that allowed them to operate in coastal waters and river mouths where larger vessels could not safely navigate. The Sea People's strategic approach during Ramses III's fifth regnal year demonstrated sophisticated planning and coordination capabilities that exceeded anything previously encountered by Egyptian forces. Rather than launching single concentrated assault, Sea Peoples employed multi-pronged strategy that simultaneously threatened Egyptian positions along Mediterranean coast, in Nile Delta, and along Kingdom's Asiatic frontiers. This coordinated approach stretched Egyptian defensive resources and prevented concentration of forces that had enabled Merneptah's earlier victories. The initial phase of campaign began with seaborne raids against Egyptian coastal installations and trading centers. These attacks, conducted by combined Peliset and reshape naval forces, targeted ports, warehouses, and shipbuilding facilities that supported Egypt's maritime commerce and naval capabilities. The raids were characterized by their precision and coordination, with attackers demonstrating detailed knowledge of Egyptian coastal defenses and locations of valuable targets. The Sea People's advance toward Nile Delta represented campaign's most critical phase, as success would provide them with access to Egypt's agricultural heartland and administrative centers. Intelligence reports reaching Ramses III described massive coalition force moving south along Levantine coast, systematically destroying or occupying Egyptian client states and allied territories. The speed of this advance, combined with reports of simultaneous naval operations in eastern Mediterranean, indicated coordination capabilities that exceeded Egyptian estimates of Sea People's organizational sophistication. Ramses III's response to this unprecedented threat required mobilizing Egypt's entire military establishment while simultaneously developing new tactical approaches specifically designed to counter Sea People's capabilities. The pharaoh ordered construction of specialized naval vessels equipped for combat operations in confined waters of Nile Delta, where traditional Egyptian rivercraft would prove inadequate against purpose-built warships. These new vessels featured reinforced construction, bronze-reinforced rams, and elevated fighting platforms that enabled Egyptian warriors to engage Sea People's ships on equal terms. The great naval battle that would determine campaign's outcome occurred in Eastern Delta, where Pelusiac branch of Nile provided Sea People's forces with access to Egypt's interior while constraining their tactical options within relatively narrow waterways. Egyptian strategic planners recognized that forcing engagement in these confined waters would neutralize many advantages that Sea People's naval forces had demonstrated during open water operations. The battle site selection reflected sophisticated understanding of naval tactical principles and demonstrated Egyptian adaptability in developing new strategic approaches. The engagement began when Sea People's naval forces advancing in coordinated formations encountered Egyptian defensive positions established at strategic points along waterway. Egyptian forces had prepared elaborate defensive works including underwater obstacles, fire ships positioned for release at optimal moments, and archer positions on both banks that created overlapping fields of fire across water. These preparations reflected months of planning and demonstrated Egyptian engineering capabilities in adapting traditional siege warfare techniques to naval combat requirements. The battle reliefs carved on walls of Ramses III's mortuary temple at Medinet Habu provide most detailed visual record of ancient naval combat ever preserved. These extensive artistic depictions show Egyptian and Sea People's vessels engaged in close combat, with warriors fighting from elevated platforms while ships maneuvered for tactical advantage. The reliefs reveal specific details of ship construction, weapons employment, and tactical formations that provide invaluable insights into Bronze Age naval warfare techniques. Egyptian ships depicted in Medinet Habu reliefs feature distinctive design elements that differentiate them from their Sea People's counterparts. Egyptian vessels show higher freeboard and more elaborate superstructures that provided elevated fighting positions for archers and spearmen. Their construction emphasized stability and defensive capability over speed and maneuverability, reflecting tactical approaches that sought to maximize Egyptian advantages in missile warfare while minimizing impact of Sea People's superiority in close combat techniques. The battle raged for hours. Egypt's fate hung in the balance. Victory or annihilation, there would be no middle ground. Sea People's vessels, by contrast, display lower profiles and more streamlined construction that emphasized speed and agility. Their ships feature prominent rams at waterline and elevated prow and stern sections decorated with bird head ornaments. Vessel construction appears optimized for ramming attacks and boarding operations with minimal superstructure that would have reduced weight while providing clear deck space for warrior movements during combat. The weapons and equipment visible in Medinet Habu battle scenes provide detailed evidence of technological capabilities possessed by both sides. Egyptian warriors are shown employing composite bows, bronze-tipped arrows, and long spears designed for thrusting attacks from elevated positions. Their equipment emphasizes missile warfare and defensive combat from prepared positions, reflecting tactical approaches that maximized Egyptian organizational advantages while minimizing exposure to Sea People's close combat expertise. Sea People's warriors depicted in reliefs carry distinctive weapons and equipment that characterize their military traditions. Pelesit fighters show their characteristic feathered headdresses, round shields, and long bronze swords, while other groups display specialized equipment appropriate to their tactical roles. The artistic depictions reveal diversity of weapons and fighting techniques employed by different Sea People's groups while demonstrating their coordination in complex multi-unit operations. But the tactical success of Egyptian forces during great naval battle represented only one aspect of much larger historical puzzle that has challenged scholars for over a century. While Ramses III's victory preserved Egyptian independence and demonstrated kingdom's military adaptability, identity and origins of Sea Peoples themselves remained enigmatic even to contemporary observers. Egyptian scribes recorded their names, depicted their distinctive equipment and appearance, and documented their military capabilities. Yet fundamental questions of where these peoples originated and how they related to known historical groups continue to generate scholarly debate and archaeological investigation. Peliset, identified as most militarily formidable component of Sea Peoples coalition, present perhaps strongest case for connecting these maritime raiders to established historical populations. Archaeological evidence from their eventual settlement areas in southern Levant reveals material culture patterns that strongly suggest identification with Philistines known from biblical and other ancient Near Eastern sources. Excavations at sites like Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gath have uncovered pottery assemblages, architectural remains, and burial practices that demonstrate clear continuities with Aegean traditions, while simultaneously showing adaptation to Levantine conditions. The pottery evidence from early Philistine sites provides particularly compelling support for Aegean origins. Ceramic vessels found in 12th century BC contexts at Ashkelon include cooking pots, storage jars, and drinking vessels that display technological and stylistic features directly traceable to late Helladic Thraci pottery traditions from mainland Greece and Aegean islands. These vessels show distinctive tempering techniques, surface treatments, and decorative motifs that had no precedent in Canaanite ceramic traditions, but demonstrate clear continuities with Mycenaean pottery-making practices. Mycenaean stirrup jars, characterized by their distinctive false spout and basket handle configuration, appear in modified forms at Philistine sites throughout 12th and 11th centuries BC. While these vessels show adaptation to local functional requirements and available raw materials, their basic construction techniques and proportional relationships remain consistent with Aegean prototypes. The persistence of these ceramic traditions through multiple generations of settlement indicates that Philistine communities maintained cultural practices derived from their pre-migration homeland, despite their new geographical and political circumstances. Architectural evidence from Philistine settlements reveals similar patterns of cultural continuity and adaptation. The Megaron-style buildings discovered at sites like Tel Kassil and Ekron demonstrate knowledge of Aegean construction techniques that had no parallel in traditional Levantine architecture. These structures feature characteristic elements including central hearths surrounded by 4 columns, entrance porches, and proportional relationships that mirror those found in Mycenaean palace complexes. The adaptation of these architectural forms to Levantine conditions using local stone and mud brick construction techniques suggests communities that retained cultural memories of their origins while adapting to new environmental circumstances. Burial practices documented at Philistine cemeteries provide additional evidence for Aegean connections while revealing complex cultural transformations that occurred during settlement process. The cemetery at Ashkelon, dating to 11th and 10th centuries BC, contains both cremation and inhumation burials that reflect diverse cultural traditions within Philistine communities. But who were the others? The Cheker, Denyen, Shurdan, Shekelesh, Weshesh. Their identities remain debated, their origins mysterious, or their ultimate fates largely unknown. Cremation burials rare in traditional Canaanite practice, but common in late Bronze Age. Greece appear alongside inhumation burials that show adaptation to local customs and environmental conditions. Grave goods from Philistine burials demonstrate material culture synthesis that characterize these communities. Bronze fibulae of Aegean types appear alongside locally produced pottery and jewelry, while iron weapons show technological innovations that combined metallurgical knowledge from multiple sources. The Shurdan present more complex identification challenge with proposed connections to Sardinia supported by linguistic evidence and archaeological parallels, but complicated by chronological and geographical considerations. Similarity between name Sherden and Sardinia has attracted scholarly attention since 19th century, with proponents of this identification pointing to warrior traditions, metallurgical practices, and material culture elements that appear in both contexts. However, relationship between Bronze Age Sardinian populations and Sherden, documented in Egyptian sources, remains disputed due to limited archaeological evidence and uncertain chronological relationships. The Lucca present perhaps strongest case for direct identification with known historical population, as their name corresponds closely to ancient Lycia in southwestern Anatolia. Egyptian and Hittite sources document Lucca peoples in Anatolian contexts throughout Late Bronze Age, establishing their geographical origins and cultural characteristics decades before their appearance as Sea Peoples participants. This documentation provides clear historical trajectory that connects Lucca's pre-migration homeland with their later roles in maritime raiding coalitions. The linguistic analysis of Sea Peoples' names has generated extensive scholarly investigation aimed at determining their ethnic and geographical origins. The preservation of these names in Egyptian hieroglyphic transcriptions provides valuable evidence for their original pronunciation and linguistic characteristics, though limitations of hieroglyphic writing systems create uncertainties in phonetic reconstruction. Comparative analysis with known Indo-European, Anatolian, and Aegean languages has produced various proposed etymologies that suggest different possible origins for Sea Peoples groups. Indo-European linguistic connections appear particularly strong for several Sea Peoples names. The Denians show possible connections to Greek Danaoi, a Homeric term for Greeks that may preserve Bronze Age ethnic designations. This identification would place Denian within broader context of Aegean population movements following collapse of Mycenaean civilization. Similarly, Eqesh have been connected to Homeric Achaeans, another Greek ethnic designation that could reflect participation of mainland Greek populations in Sea Peoples movements. The debate over Sea Peoples' political and social organization centers on fundamental questions about their nature as historical phenomena. Some scholars argue for unified confederations that maintained coordinated leadership structures and strategic objectives across multiple campaigns and geographical regions. This interpretation emphasizes apparent coordination of Sea Peoples' attacks, their consistent military capabilities, and their ability to conduct complex operations requiring substantial logistical support and planning. Alternative interpretations characterize Sea Peoples as desperate refugee groups driven by desperation rather than unified by common political purposes. This perspective emphasizes displacement and destruction that characterized Late Bronze Age collapse, arguing that population movements reflected communities fleeing disaster rather than pursuing coordinated conquest strategies. The diversity of Sea Peoples' material culture, military equipment, and settlement patterns supports interpretations that emphasize heterogeneous character rather than unified organization. The opportunistic raider interpretation provides third perspective that characterizes Sea Peoples as maritime warrior communities that exploited collapse of Bronze Age political systems for economic and territorial gain. This approach emphasizes military capabilities and maritime expertise that enabled Sea Peoples groups to conduct profitable raiding operations while avoiding risks associated with direct territorial conquest. The flexibility and adaptability demonstrated by Sea Peoples communities supports interpretations that emphasize pragmatic responses to changing circumstances rather than ideologically driven expansion programs. Regional variations in Sea Peoples' activities and settlement patterns provide evidence for all three interpretational approaches. Some areas show evidence of coordinated military campaigns and planned settlement programs that suggest confederation-level organization and strategic planning. Other regions reveal patterns of desperate refugee settlement and defensive community formation that reflect displacement pressures rather than expansionist objectives. Still, other contexts show evidence of opportunistic exploitation of local weaknesses and commercial opportunities that indicates pragmatic adaptation to available circumstances. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, a complex mix of desperate refugees, opportunistic raiders, and organized warriors all caught up in Bronze Age collapse's chaos. Military defeats inflicted by Ramses III's forces marked end of large-scale Sea Peoples invasions, but not their disappearance from historical record. Rather than retreating to their mysterious homelands or dissolving into obscurity, these displaced populations established permanent settlements throughout Eastern Mediterranean, fundamentally altering demographic and cultural landscape of region. The most successful and archaeologically visible of these settlement efforts occurred in southern Levant, where Peliset transformed themselves into Philistines, creating distinctive urban civilization that would dominate coastal plain for centuries. The establishment of Philistine city-states in southern Levant represents one of the most remarkable examples of successful cultural adaptation and political organization in ancient world. Rather than attempting to recreate their lost Bronze Age homelands, these former Sea Peoples developed new forms of urban organization that combined elements from their Aegean heritage with practical adaptations to Levantine conditions. Archaeological excavations at Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath reveal sophisticated urban planning that incorporated advanced drainage systems, specialized craft production areas, and defensive installations designed to protect thriving commercial centers. Gaza emerged as northernmost of major Philistine centers, strategically positioned to control trade routes connecting Egypt with Levantine interior. Excavations in city's ancient quarters have uncovered substantial mud brick architecture dating to 12th century BC, including large residential complexes with interior courtyards, storage facilities, and workshop areas. Pottery assemblages from these early levels demonstrate technological continuity, connecting Philistine ceramic traditions to their Mycenaean predecessors while showing rapid adaptation to local clay sources and functional requirements. Ashkelon developed into largest and most prosperous of Philistine city-states, with archaeological evidence revealing settlement covering over 60 hectares at its peak. City's strategic position on Mediterranean coast provided access to maritime trade networks, while its agricultural hinterland supported substantial population growth. Excavations directed by Lawrence Steger uncovered extensive remains of Philistine period occupation, including monumental architecture, industrial installations, and residential quarters, demonstrating communities' rapid economic development following initial settlement. The material culture recovered from Ashkelon provides detailed insights into Philistine daily life and cultural practices during early settlement period. Cooking pots with distinctive rim forms and surface treatments show clear derivation from Aegean prototypes, but manufactured using local clays and adapted to Levantine cooking practices. Storage jars display similar patterns of cultural continuity and adaptation, with vessel forms that maintain proportional relationships characteristic of Mycenaean pottery traditions, while incorporating functional modifications suited to local storage requirements. Ashdod's archaeological record documents transformation of modest Bronze Age settlement into major Philistine urban center during 12th and 11th centuries BC. Excavations by Moshe Dotan revealed extensive evidence of Philistine occupation, including substantial architectural remains, pottery assemblages, and craft production facilities, demonstrating communities' rapid economic and demographic growth. Site's strategic position, controlling inland trade routes, complemented its role in maritime commerce, creating economic opportunities that supported urban development on unprecedented scale for region. Ekron, identified with archaeological site of Tel Mikne, represents perhaps most completely excavated Philistine city, providing comprehensive evidence for urban development, economic specialization, and cultural change over several centuries of occupation. Sites excavation by Trude Dothan and Seymour Gittin revealed extensive remains of Philistine period settlement, including residential quarters, industrial areas, and public buildings, documenting communities' evolution from initial settlement through its eventual integration into broader regional political systems. The olive oil production facilities at Ekron demonstrate economic specialization that enabled Philistine communities to achieve prosperity in their new homeland. Archaeological evidence reveals over 100 olive oil installations dating to 7th century BC, making Ekron largest known olive oil production center in ancient world. These facilities utilized advanced pressing technologies that combine traditional Mediterranean olive processing techniques with innovations maximizing production efficiency and product quality. Gath, largest of Philistine cities according to biblical sources, has been identified with archaeological site of Tel Es-Safi, where ongoing excavations by Aaron Meir continue to reveal evidence of Philistine occupation and cultural development. Site's strategic position controlling routes between coastal plain and Judean hills made it crucial center for both commercial and military activities. Archaeological remains include substantial fortification walls, residential quarters, and craft production areas demonstrating communities' military capabilities and economic prosperity. The Philistines had transformed from raiders into settlers, from destroyers into builders. They would endure for centuries, becoming one of Israel's greatest rivals and leaving legacy that persists in name Palestine itself. The fortification systems at Gath reveal sophisticated understanding of defensive architecture, combining elements from different military engineering traditions. Wall construction techniques show influence from both Aegean and Near Eastern fortification practices, creating defensive systems that incorporated most effective elements from each tradition. These installations required substantial labor investments and technical expertise, indicating communities with organizational capabilities and resources necessary for major construction projects. Beyond well-documented Philistine settlements, archaeological evidence reveals other Sea Peoples groups establishing communities throughout Eastern Mediterranean. The Cheka mentioned in Egyptian sources as participants in Sea Peoples coalitions appear to have established settlements along Levantine coast, with most significant concentration at Dor. This strategic port city, located on Mediterranean coast south of modern Haifa, became major commercial center under Cheka control, developing extensive trade networks connecting Levant with Cyprus, Anatolia, and Aegean. The development of ironworking capabilities introduced by Sea Peoples communities represented perhaps their most significant technological contribution to regions they settled. While iron technology had existed in limited forms during Late Bronze Age, collapse of established copper and tin trade networks made bronze increasingly difficult to produce in quantities required for tools and weapons. Sea Peoples groups, particularly those with origins in Anatolian regions where early iron smelting techniques had developed, possessed knowledge of ore processing and metalworking methods that enabled them to exploit local iron deposits more effectively than established populations. Archaeological evidence from Philistine sites reveals sophisticated iron production facilities, demonstrating advanced understanding of smelting techniques and heat management. Excavations at Tel Mikna Ekron uncovered furnace installations dating to 11th century BC, showing construction methods specifically designed for ironworking. As these facilities featured stone-lined combustion chambers with carefully designed airflow systems that could achieve temperatures necessary for effective iron smelting. The furnaces incorporated bellows systems using leather bags operated by foot pedals, enabling metal workers to maintain consistent heat levels during extended smelting operations. The iron objects produced in these Philistine workshops revealed technological sophistication that exceeded contemporary regional capabilities. Agricultural implements, including plowshares, sickles, and hoes, show advanced forging techniques that created tools with hardened cutting edges and more durable construction than bronze equivalents. Superior performance of these iron tools enabled more efficient agricultural practices, contributing to increased food production that supported growing urban populations in Philistine territories. Military applications of iron technology provided Philistine communities with significant tactical advantages during conflicts with neighboring populations still relying primarily on bronze weapons. Iron sword blades found at Philistine sites demonstrate advanced metallurgical techniques, including differential hardening, where cutting edges were made harder than blade cores to combine sharpness with flexibility. Spear points show similar technological sophistication with socketed construction that provided stronger hafting than traditional bronze weapons while maintaining lighter weight for improved handling. Pottery production in Sea Peoples' settlements demonstrates similar patterns of technological innovation and cultural synthesis. Ceramic traditions established by Philistine communities combined advanced wheel-throwing techniques derived from Mycenaean pottery traditions with decorative styles that incorporated elements from Canaanite, Cypriot, and other regional ceramic systems. This synthesis produced distinctive pottery styles that served both functional and cultural purposes, enabling communities to maintain connections to their heritage while adapting to local preferences and requirements. The technical aspects of Philistine pottery production reveal sophisticated understanding of ceramic technology that exceeded many contemporary regional capabilities. Kilns discovered at Ashkelon and other Philistine sites show advanced construction techniques enabling precise temperature control and efficient fuel consumption. These installations featured updraft designs with separate combustion and firing chambers, allowing potters to achieve consistent firing conditions that produced high-quality ceramics with uniform coloration and durability. Decorative techniques employed by Philistine potters demonstrate remarkable artistic innovation combining motifs from multiple cultural sources. Bird representations derived from Mycenaean artistic traditions appear alongside geometric patterns showing influence from Cypriot and Levantine decorative systems. Integration of these different artistic elements created distinctive decorative styles that were recognizably Philistine while remaining accessible to regional populations with different cultural backgrounds. The Sea Peoples had brought with them not just destruction, but innovation. Not just chaos, but new technologies. They were transforming Mediterranean world, introducing Iron Age that would define next millennium. Architectural innovations introduced by Sea Peoples communities reflect similar patterns of technological transfer and cultural adaptation. Building techniques employed in Philistine settlements combined construction methods derived from Aegean traditions with adaptations to local materials and environmental conditions. Result was distinctive architectural styles that provided improved functionality while maintaining cultural connections to ancestral building traditions. Foundation systems used in Philistine construction demonstrate advanced understanding of structural engineering, reflecting knowledge gained from building in seismically active Mediterranean regions. Stone foundations extended deeper than typical in Canaanite construction, with careful attention to drainage systems that prevented water damage to mud brick superstructures. These technical improvements enabled construction of larger and more durable buildings that could accommodate growing urban populations and expanding commercial activities. Interior space organization in Philistine buildings shows influence from Aegean domestic architecture while adapting to Levantine climate conditions and social practices. Central hearth installations maintained connections to ancestral traditions while being modified to accommodate local fuel sources and cooking practices. Room arrangements provided improved ventilation and temperature control compared to traditional Canaanite domestic architecture, creating more comfortable living conditions that contributed to community health and productivity. Religious practices show particularly clear evidence of cultural synthesis and adaptation. Philistine cult installations combine architectural elements from Aegean religious traditions with iconographic and ritual elements derived from Canaanite religious practices. Cult objects from these contexts include both imported items that maintain connections to ancestral traditions and locally produced pieces that show influence from regional iconographic systems. This religious synthesis enabled Philistine communities to maintain cultural identity while adapting to spiritual landscape of their new homeland. The gradual assimilation of Sea Peoples communities into local populations represents one of most significant long-term consequences of their settlement in Eastern Mediterranean. Archaeological evidence reveals cultural synthesis processes that occurred over multiple generations as these displaced populations adapted to their new homelands while contributing their own technological and cultural innovations to regional development. This assimilation process varied significantly depending on local conditions, community size, and nature of interactions with established populations. Philistine communities provide clearest evidence for assimilation processes with archaeological sequences that document gradual cultural change over several centuries of settlement. Early phases show strong continuity with Aegean material culture traditions, while later periods reveal increasing influence from local Canaanite and other regional cultures. This cultural synthesis produced distinctive hybrid traditions that combined elements from multiple sources while maintaining recognizable connections to their various origins. Transformation of Sea Peoples from maritime raiders into settled communities created a remarkable period of technological and cultural innovation that would reshape Eastern Mediterranean world for centuries. Displaced populations who established themselves in territories from Levantine coast to Sardinia brought with them not merely remnants of Bronze Age civilization, but active traditions of craftsmanship, metallurgy, and urban organization that would catalyze fundamental changes in regional development. Archaeological evidence reveals that these communities served as crucial agents in transition from Bronze Age to Iron Age technologies, while simultaneously creating new forms of cultural expression that synthesized elements from their diverse origins with innovations developed in their new homelands. The collapse of Bronze Age civilization and subsequent settlement of Sea Peoples throughout Eastern Mediterranean created massive power vacuum that fundamentally altered political landscape of ancient world. Destruction of major urban centers, breakdown of established trade networks, and displacement of entire populations left vast territories without effective governance or economic organization. This unprecedented disruption provided opportunities for emerging powers to expand their influence while simultaneously forcing existing states to adapt their strategies and institutions to survive in radically transformed environment. The Neo-Assyrian Empire emerged as primary beneficiary of this regional chaos, exploiting weakness of traditional rivals to establish unprecedented territorial control across Mesopotamia and beyond. During reigns of Tiglath-Pileser I and his successors, Assyrian forces systematically occupied territories previously controlled by Hittite Empire, Mitanni, and various Aramean kingdoms. Assyrian military machine, already formidable during Middle Assyrian period, adapted its tactics and organization to exploit opportunities created by Bronze Age collapse, while developing new administrative systems capable of governing diverse populations brought under imperial control. But that's another story for another time. Our story, the story of the Sea Peoples, ends here with mysterious raiders transformed into settlers, with Bronze Age world destroyed and Iron Age born from its ashes. Simultaneously, collapse of Bronze Age maritime networks created opportunities for Phoenician city-states to establish unprecedented commercial dominance throughout Mediterranean. Destruction of major trading centers like Ugarit eliminated established competitors, while breakdown of centralized political control in many regions created demand for commercial services that Phoenician merchants could provide. Cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos transformed from regional trading centers into nuclei of commercial networks that would eventually span from Atlantic coast of Iberia to Black Sea shores of Anatolia. Phoenician maritime technology during this period incorporated innovations developed in response to changed conditions of post-collapse Mediterranean commerce. Ships designed for long-distance voyaging featured improved hull construction, more efficient sail configurations, and specialized cargo handling equipment that enabled profitable operations across vast distances. Archaeological evidence from shipwrecks and harbor installations reveals vessels capable of carrying substantial cargoes while maintaining speed and maneuverability necessary for successful commercial operations in waters that often lacked effective political control. The establishment of Phoenician trading posts and colonies throughout Mediterranean created new forms of commercial organization that differed fundamentally from Bronze Age trade patterns. Rather than relying on diplomatic relationships between major powers to facilitate commerce, Phoenician merchants developed independent commercial networks based on permanent settlements that could provide secure bases for trading operations. But these installations, ranging from simple warehousing facilities to fully developed urban centers, created infrastructure that supported regular commercial contact between distant regions while providing security for valuable cargoes and personnel. Carthage, established by Tyrian colonists during 9th century BC, exemplifies success of this Phoenician commercial strategy. Archaeological excavations in cities' earliest levels reveal sophisticated urban planning that incorporated harbor installations, residential quarters, and craft production areas designed to support both local populations and visiting merchants. Cities' rapid growth from modest trading post to major regional power demonstrates economic opportunities created by collapse of Bronze Age political systems and effectiveness of Phoenician adaptation to changed circumstances. Phoenician influence on Mediterranean cultural development extended far beyond commercial activities to encompass fundamental innovations in writing systems, religious practices, and artistic traditions. The alphabetic script developed by Phoenician scribes provided more efficient and accessible writing system than complex syllabic and logographic scripts used during Bronze Age. This innovation democratized literacy by making written communication available to broader segments of society while facilitating commercial record-keeping and long-distance correspondence essential for Mediterranean-wide trade networks. But the Greek world experienced perhaps most dramatic transformation during post-collapse period as destruction of Mycenaean palace states created conditions that would eventually give rise to distinctive polis system that characterized classical Greek civilization. Collapse of centralized authority, breakdown of administrative systems, and massive population decline that followed Bronze Age catastrophe forced surviving communities to develop new forms of political and social organization adapted to their reduced circumstances and available resources. Archaeological evidence from Greek sites during early Iron Age reveals communities that had abandoned large urban centers characteristic of Mycenaean civilization in favor of smaller settlements that could be more easily defended and supplied. And these early Iron Age communities typically occupied hilltop locations with natural defensive advantages, while their material culture shows significant simplification compared to Bronze Age standards. Pottery production, metalwork, and architectural construction all show evidence of technological regression as specialized knowledge was lost and communities focused on basic survival rather than cultural elaboration. The gradual recovery of Greek communities during 10th and 9th centuries BC involved development of new social and political institutions that would eventually evolve into classical polis. Archaeological evidence suggests these early communities were organized around kinship groups and warrior bands rather than bureaucratic hierarchies that had characterized Mycenaean palace states. Leadership appears to have been based on personal charisma, military prowess, and ability to provide security and resources for community members rather than inherited royal authority. The emergence of Greek trading activities during 8th century BC reflects both recovery from post-collapse conditions and adaptation to new Mediterranean commercial opportunities. Greek merchants established trading relationships with Phoenician commercial networks while developing independent routes connecting Aegean with markets in Anatolia, Black Sea region, and eventually Western Mediterranean. These commercial activities provided access to raw materials and luxury goods that supported community development while creating wealth that enabled political and cultural elaboration. The world had changed forever. Bronze Age empires were gone. But from ruins emerged new civilizations that would shape Western history for millennia to come. Greek colonization movements beginning in 8th century BC represent systematic responses to population pressure and resource limitations in Greek homeland, while simultaneously exploiting commercial opportunities created by post-collapse conditions throughout Mediterranean. Unlike Phoenician commercial colonies, Greek settlements typically involved establishment of independent political communities that maintain cultural connections to their mother cities while developing autonomous governmental institutions. This colonization pattern created networks of related but independent communities that would eventually form foundation of classical Greek civilization. And the cultural innovations that emerged from Greek communities during early Iron Age recovery period included fundamental developments in artistic expression, religious practices, and intellectual traditions that would influence Mediterranean civilization for centuries. Epic poetry attributed to Homer represents literary achievement that synthesized cultural memories of Bronze Age world with contemporary social values and political ideals. These works preserved knowledge of Bronze Age civilization while adapting it to serve cultural needs of Iron Age communities, creating literary traditions that would inspire subsequent generations of Greek artists and thinkers. Religious practices that developed in post-collapse Greek communities show similar patterns of cultural synthesis and innovation. Pantheon of Greek gods incorporated deities and mythological traditions from Bronze Age sources while adapting them to serve spiritual needs of Iron Age communities. Sanctuary sites like Olympia and Delphi became centers of inter-community religious activity that helped maintain cultural connections between dispersed Greek settlements while providing forums for political and commercial interaction. The demographic and cultural changes that occurred in Cyprus, Levant, and Anatolia as direct results of Sea Peoples' settlements created lasting transformations that would influence regional development for centuries. In Cyprus, establishment of Sea Peoples' communities alongside existing populations created culturally diverse societies that combined elements from Aegean, Anatolian, and local Cypriot traditions. Archaeological evidence from sites like Salamis and Kition reveals material culture assemblages demonstrating complex cultural interactions and technological exchange between different population groups. Cypriot copper production, which had been disrupted during Bronze Age collapse, gradually recovered under new management systems that incorporated technological innovations introduced by Sea Peoples craftsmen. Ironworking techniques enabled more efficient extraction and processing of copper ores, while new smelting methods improved quality and quantity of metal production. These technological improvements, combined with Cyprus's strategic position in Eastern Mediterranean trade networks, enabled Ireland to regain its role as major source of metal for regional markets. The cultural synthesis that occurred in Cyprus created distinctive artistic and architectural traditions, combining elements from multiple sources while adapting to local conditions and preferences. Pottery production shows influence from Aegean, Anatolian, and Levantine ceramic traditions while maintaining distinctive Cypriot characteristics that reflected local clay sources and firing techniques. Architectural remains reveal building methods that incorporated construction techniques from different Mediterranean traditions, while adapting to local materials and environmental conditions. Religious practices in post-settlement Cyprus demonstrate similar patterns of cultural synthesis with cult installations that combined architectural elements from different traditions while serving spiritual needs of culturally diverse populations. Sanctuary at Kition shows evidence of religious activities that incorporated elements from Phoenician, Greek, and local Cypriot traditions, creating syncretic practices that enabled communities with different cultural backgrounds to participate in shared religious observances. The transformation of trade networks following Sea Peoples settlements and Bronze Age collapse required fundamental changes in commercial organization and transportation systems throughout Eastern Mediterranean. Destruction of major trading centers and breakdown of diplomatic relationships that facilitated Bronze Age commerce forced merchants and communities to develop new approaches to long-distance trade that could function in absence of centralized political control. Regional trade networks that emerged during early Iron Age typically operated on smaller scales than their Bronze Age predecessors, connecting neighboring communities rather than spanning entire regions. Archaeological evidence shows increased importance of local and regional markets with pottery, metalwork, and other manufactured goods showing more limited distribution patterns than comparable Bronze Age products. This localization of commerce reflected both reduced transportation capabilities and increased risks associated with long-distance travel in politically unstable regions. The gradual recovery of Mediterranean commerce during 9th and 8th centuries BC involved development of new commercial practices and institutional arrangements that could function effectively in changed political environment. Merchant communities established permanent trading posts at strategic locations, creating secure bases for commercial operations while providing services needed by local populations. These installations often evolved into significant urban centers that served as focal points for regional economic development and cultural exchange. Maritime technology improvements during this period enabled more efficient and secure transportation of goods across Mediterranean distances. Ship construction techniques incorporated innovations that improved vessel durability and cargo capacity while reducing crew requirements and operational costs. Harbor installations at major trading centers featured improved facilities for loading and unloading cargoes, while storage systems provided secure accommodation for valuable goods during extended trading operations. The development of standardized weights, measures, and currency systems facilitated commercial transactions between communities with different cultural traditions and governmental systems. Archaeological evidence reveals increasing standardization of pottery vessels, metal ingots, and other trade goods, indicating emergence of commercial practices that could function across cultural and political boundaries. These standardization efforts reduced transaction costs while increasing reliability and predictability of commercial relationships. Cultural exchange, facilitated by recovering trade networks, contributed to spread of technological innovations, artistic styles, and religious practices throughout Mediterranean region. Movement of craftsmen, merchants, and other specialists between different communities created opportunities for knowledge transfer that accelerated technological development and cultural elaboration. Pottery production techniques, metalworking methods, and architectural innovations spread through these networks, contributing to regional cultural development while maintaining distinctive local characteristics. The emergence of alphabetic writing systems represents one of the most significant cultural innovations facilitated by post-collapse trade networks. Phoenician alphabet, developed from earlier writing systems but simplified for commercial use, spread throughout Mediterranean commercial networks where it was adapted to local languages and cultural requirements. This innovation democratized literacy while facilitating record-keeping and communication necessary for complex commercial operations. Religious ideas and practices also spread through commercial networks, creating opportunities for cultural synthesis and innovation that would influence Mediterranean civilization for centuries. Movement of merchants, craftsmen, and other travelers between different communities facilitated exchange of religious concepts, mythological traditions, and cult practices that contributed to development of new forms of religious expression adapted to culturally diverse societies. The systematic study of Sea Peoples phenomenon began during 19th century with decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphic texts and early archaeological excavations in Eastern Mediterranean. Jean-François Champollion's breakthrough in reading hieroglyphs during 1820s first made accessible, detailed Egyptian accounts of conflicts with these mysterious maritime raiders. Karnak inscriptions of Meneptah and extensive battle reliefs at Medinet Habu suddenly provided contemporary documentation of events that had previously existed only in fragmentary biblical references and classical authors' distant memories. Early Egyptologists like Gaston Maspero and Heinrich Brugsch approached Sea Peoples records with methodological tools of 19th century historical scholarship, focusing primarily on philological analysis of Egyptian texts and attempts to identify these ancient names with known historical populations. Their work established basic framework for Sea Peoples research by cataloguing various group names mentioned in Egyptian sources, analyzing chronological sequence of encounters, and proposing initial theories about their geographical origins based on linguistic similarities with later Mediterranean peoples. The archaeological dimension of Sea Peoples research emerged gradually as excavations throughout Eastern Mediterranean began uncovering material evidence that could be connected to population movements described in Egyptian texts. William Matthew Flinders. Petries' excavations in Palestine during 1890s first identified pottery assemblages showing clear connections to Aegean ceramic traditions, providing material confirmation that significant population movements from Aegean region had indeed occurred during Late Bronze Age collapse period. These early archaeological discoveries established pottery analysis as a crucial tool for tracing Sea Peoples' movements and settlements. The development of stratigraphic excavation techniques during early 20th century revolutionized Sea Peoples research by providing precise chronological frameworks for correlating archaeological evidence with historical sources. Excavations at sites like Tel el-Hesi and Giza revealed destruction layers that could be dated to period of Sea Peoples invasions, while associated pottery assemblages provided material evidence for cultural transformations that accompanied these population movements. This integration of archaeological and textual evidence created more sophisticated analytical frameworks that moved beyond simple name identifications to examine broader patterns of cultural change and adaptation. And the story of Sea Peoples continues to fascinate because fundamental questions remain unanswered despite centuries of intensive research. But perhaps that's fitting. They emerged from chaos, transformed Mediterranean world, then disappeared into new identities, leaving only mysteries behind. The interwar period saw significant advances in Sea Peoples research through large-scale excavations at key sites and development of ceramic typologies that could trace cultural connections across vast geographical distances. American excavations at Megiddo, directed by Clarence Fisher, and later by Gordon Loud, uncovered extensive remains of late Bronze Age destruction and Iron Age rebuilding that provided detailed evidence for transition period when Sea Peoples' settlements were being established. Similarly, British excavations at Tel ed-Duwer revealed destruction evidence that could be correlated with Egyptian accounts of military campaigns in Levant. Ceramic analysis during this period became increasingly sophisticated, with scholars like William Foxwell Albright developing detailed typological sequences that could trace evolution of pottery styles from late Bronze Age Mycenaean prototypes through their transformation in Philistine and other Sea Peoples contexts. These ceramic studies provided crucial evidence for cultural continuity between Aegean populations and Eastern Mediterranean settlements establishing material foundations for theories about sea peoples' origins that went beyond linguistic speculation to encompass tangible archaeological evidence. The post-World War II era brought revolutionary changes to sea peoples' research through application of scientific dating methods, systematic regional surveys, and interdisciplinary approaches that incorporated insights from climatology, anthropology, and other fields. Radiocarbon dating enabled precise chronological frameworks that could correlate destruction events across different sites and regions, revealing synchronous nature of late Bronze Age collapse and providing temporal precision that had previously been impossible to achieve. Kathleen Kenyon's excavations at Jericho during 1950s exemplified new methodological rigor that characterized post-war archaeology with meticulous stratigraphic recording and comprehensive artifact analysis that provided detailed evidence for cultural transitions during Sea Peoples' period. Her work demonstrated how careful excavation could reveal complex sequences of destruction, abandonment, and resettlement that reflected turbulent conditions of late Bronze Age collapse, while providing evidence for material culture changes that accompanied new population settlements. The discovery and excavation of Uluburun shipwreck during 1980s provided unprecedented insights into late Bronze Age maritime trade networks and international connections that characterized Mediterranean world before Sea Peoples' disruptions. Wreck's cargo dating to around 1300 BC included materials from across known world demonstrating complexity and extent of commercial relationships that would be disrupted by collapse events. This archaeological evidence provided crucial context for understanding both scale of disruption caused by Sea Peoples' activities and economic foundations that supported their maritime capabilities. Contemporary Sea Peoples research encompasses multiple competing theoretical frameworks that attempt to explain origins, motivations, and historical significance of these population movements. Single migration theory advocated by scholars like Trude Dothan argues that Sea Peoples represent coordinated population movements from Aegean region following collapse of Mycenaean civilization. This interpretation emphasizes cultural continuities visible in pottery, architecture, and burial practices between Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean contexts, suggesting organized migration by coherent cultural groups seeking new territories after losing their original homelands. The multiple waves theory proposed by scholars like Idemar Singer argues that Sea Peoples' activities represent series of distinct population movements occurring over several generations, rather than single coordinated migration event. This interpretation emphasizes chronological spread of Sea Peoples' encounters with Egyptian forces, diversity of material culture traditions found in different settlement contexts, and varied political and military organizations demonstrated by different groups. Multiple waves approach suggests that economic disruption, political instability, and environmental pressures created conditions that generated repeated episodes of population displacement and maritime raiding over extended periods. Climate change theories have gained increasing prominence in Sea Peoples research as paleoclimatic data has become more sophisticated and comprehensive. Scholars like Brian Fagan argue that environmental deterioration during late 13th century BC created conditions that forced population movements and contributed to collapse of established political systems throughout Eastern Mediterranean. This approach emphasizes role of drought, temperature fluctuations, and agricultural disruption in creating economic and social pressures that motivated Sea Peoples' activities. Paleoclimatic evidence supporting environmental theories includes tree ring data from Anatolian sites revealing prolonged drought conditions during late 13th century BC, coinciding with chronological framework for Sea Peoples' activities. Pollen analysis from Eastern Mediterranean lake sediments shows vegetation changes consistent with reduced precipitation and increased aridity, while isotopic analysis provides additional evidence for climatic deterioration during this period. These environmental indicators suggest that agricultural disruption and resource scarcity created conditions forcing population movements and contributing to political instability throughout region. Systems collapse models developed by scholars like Robert Drews and Eric Klein argue that Sea Peoples' activities represent symptoms rather than causes of broader systemic breakdown affecting late Bronze Age civilization. This theoretical framework emphasizes interconnected nature of Bronze Age political, economic, and social systems, arguing that disruption in any component could trigger cascading failures throughout entire network. Systems collapse theories suggest that Sea Peoples' movements both resulted from and contributed to breakdown of established international relationships, trade networks, and political institutions. Archaeological evidence supporting systems collapse models includes synchronous destruction of major urban centers across different regions, breakdown of standardized pottery production and distribution systems, and collapse of specialized craft production that characterized late Bronze Age economies. Disruption of copper and tin trade networks that supplied bronze production throughout Mediterranean demonstrates interconnected nature of late Bronze Age systems, while rapid spread of iron technology suggests adaptive responses to breakdown of established resource supply networks. DNA analysis has emerged as a powerful tool for investigating Sea Peoples' origins and settlement patterns, though results remain preliminary and sometimes contradictory. Genetic studies of ancient remains from Philistine cemetery sites at Ashkelon have identified European ancestry components that support theories about Aegean origins, while simultaneously revealing complex patterns of population mixing that occurred during settlement process. And these genetic investigations provide new types of evidence for evaluating competing theories about Sea Peoples' movements, though technical limitations and sampling constraints continue to limit their interpretive value. Advanced dating methods, including high-precision radiocarbon analysis and Bayesian statistical modeling, have enabled more precise chronological frameworks for correlating Sea Peoples' activities across different regions. These techniques have revealed rapid pace of late Bronze Age collapse events, while providing detailed temporal sequences for destruction and resettlement processes. Improved chronological precision enables better correlation of archaeological evidence with historical sources, while supporting or challenging different theoretical interpretations of Sea Peoples' phenomena. Isotopic analysis of human and animal remains from Sea Peoples' contexts provides new evidence for migration patterns and settlement processes. Strontium isotope analysis of tooth enamel can identify individuals who spent their childhood in different geographical regions, providing direct evidence for population movements that supplements pottery and architectural evidence. Oxygen isotope analysis provides additional information about geographical origins and migration patterns, while carbon and nitrogen isotope analysis of bone collagen reveals dietary information that can indicate cultural practices and economic adaptations. Underwater archaeology has contributed significant new evidence for Sea Peoples' activities through excavation of shipwrecks and harbour installations that provide direct evidence for maritime capabilities and commercial activities. Recent discoveries of Bronze Age shipwrecks in eastern Mediterranean have revealed vessel construction techniques, cargo compositions, and navigation equipment that illuminate technological foundations for Sea Peoples' maritime operations. Harbour excavations at sites like Dor and other coastal centres have uncovered port facilities and associated material culture, demonstrating commercial activities that supported Sea Peoples' communities. Unresolved questions about Sea Peoples' origins continue to generate scholarly debate despite decades of intensive research. Precise geographical origins of different Sea Peoples groups remain uncertain, with competing theories proposing Aegean, Anatolian, Western Mediterranean, or multiple source regions for different populations. linguistic evidence provides tantalizing clues about possible connections to known historical peoples, but limitations of Egyptian hieroglyphic transcription and absence of Sea Peoples texts in their own languages prevents definitive identification. The motivations driving Sea Peoples' activities remain similarly disputed, with different theories emphasizing economic opportunism, environmental pressures, political displacement, or combinations of multiple factors. Relationship between different Sea Peoples groups and degree of coordination in their activities continues to generate competing interpretations based on different readings of archaeological and textual evidence. Role of individual agency versus collective decision-making in Sea Peoples movements represents another area where evidence remains ambiguous and open to different theoretical interpretations. The ultimate fate of Sea Peoples populations after their initial settlement periods raises questions about assimilation processes, cultural persistence, and long-term demographic impact. While Philistine communities provide clear evidence for successful adaptation and cultural development, histories of other Sea Peoples groups remain less well documented. Archaeological evidence suggests various outcomes ranging from successful integration into local populations to gradual cultural assimilation that eliminated distinctive Sea Peoples characteristics over successive generations. But despite all uncertainties, one thing is clear: Sea Peoples changed history forever. Future research directions in Sea Peoples studies will likely emphasize interdisciplinary approaches that combine traditional archaeological and textual analysis with scientific techniques and comparative studies from other historical contexts. Expanded DNA analysis of ancient remains from multiple sites and time periods may provide clearer evidence for population movements and genetic relationships between different communities. Improved paleoclimatic reconstruction could clarify the role of environmental factors in motivating Sea Peoples' activities and contributing to late Bronze Age collapse. Regional survey projects and systematic excavation programs at key sites continue to generate new archaeological evidence that refines understanding of Sea Peoples' settlement patterns and cultural development. Application of remote sensing technologies and geographic information systems enables more comprehensive analysis of settlement distributions and environmental relationships that may reveal previously unrecognized patterns in Sea Peoples' activities. Comparative analysis with population movements and cultural transitions from other historical periods may provide theoretical frameworks for understanding Sea Peoples' phenomena within broader patterns of human migration and cultural change. Studies of medieval migrations, colonial period population movements, and modern refugee situations may offer insights into social processes and adaptive strategies that characterize Sea Peoples' communities during their transition from displacement to settlement. The enduring fascination with Sea Peoples reflects their unique position at crucial transition point in ancient Mediterranean history. Their activities coincided with collapse of Bronze Age civilization and emergence of Iron Age political and cultural systems that would shape ancient world for centuries. Understanding Sea Peoples' phenomena provides insights into processes of cultural change, population movement, and political transformation that remain relevant for comprehending broader patterns of historical development. The mystery surrounding their origins and dramatic nature of their impact on established civilizations continues to capture scholarly and popular imagination, ensuring that Sea Peoples research will remain active and evolving field of historical investigation. The Sea Peoples ultimately represent one of history's most significant examples of how displaced populations can transform from agents of destruction into creators of new civilizations. Their journey from mysterious maritime raiders to settled urban communities demonstrates remarkable human adaptability and cultural resilience. While many questions about their origins and motivations may never be definitively answered, Their legacy in archaeological record and their influence on subsequent Mediterranean development provides lasting testimony to their historical significance. The Sea Peoples phenomenon reminds us that periods of apparent chaos and destruction often contain seeds of cultural innovation and renewal as displaced populations adapt their inherited traditions to new circumstances and create distinctive forms of civilization that enrich broader human experience. Their story is one of collapse and rebirth, of old worlds ending and new worlds beginning, of Bronze Age empires falling and Iron Age kingdoms rising from ashes. They came as raiders bearing strange names and foreign weapons. They fought the greatest empire of their age and survived to tell the tale. Some settled in new lands, becoming Philistines, Phoenicians, and peoples who would shape Mediterranean for centuries. Others disappeared into history, their ultimate fates unknown. But all of them, Peliset, Checker, Sherdan, Denyen, Shekelesh, Weshesh, played their part in one of ancient history's greatest transformations. They witnessed Bronze Age world at its apex. They participated in its catastrophic collapse. They helped build Iron Age civilization from its ruins. The palaces burned, the empires fell, the old order died, but from destruction emerged something new. New technologies, new peoples, new civilizations. The Sea Peoples destroyed Bronze Age world. But in doing so, they created conditions for classical Mediterranean civilization that would follow. From Mycenaean Greece came Homeric epics preserving memories of lost Bronze Age glory. From Phoenician traders came alphabet that would spread literacy throughout Mediterranean. From Philistine settlers came iron technology that would revolutionize ancient warfare and agriculture. The destruction was real, the suffering immense, the loss of knowledge, culture, and human life staggering. But transformation was also creative. The Iron Age Mediterranean that emerged from Bronze Age collapse would achieve heights Bronze Age world never imagined. Democracy in Athens, philosophy in Ionia, engineering in Rome, all built on foundations laid by societies that emerged from Sea Peoples' era. We remember them as destroyers, as raiders, as mysterious peoples from the sea who brought civilization crashing down. But perhaps we should also remember them as survivors, as adapters, as builders who transformed from refugees into founders of new nations. The question that haunts scholars is simple, yet profound. What really caused Bronze Age collapse? Was it climate change creating agricultural failures that forced migrations? Was it systems collapse where interconnected Bronze Age networks proved too fragile? Was it new military technologies, perhaps the long sword or composite bow, that gave raiders advantages over established armies? Was it simply accumulated pressures from multiple sources creating perfect storm? The truth likely involves all these factors and more. Climate data shows significant drought during late 13th century BC. Archaeological evidence reveals widespread destruction and abandonment. Textual sources document population movements and military conflicts. Economic analysis shows breakdown of trade networks. Social theory suggests institutional failures. Each piece of evidence tells part of story. Together they paint a picture of civilization under stress from multiple directions simultaneously. Bronze Age Mediterranean had created remarkable achievement, interconnected world, where Egyptian gold, Cypriot copper, Aegean pottery, Anatolian iron, Baltic amber, and African ivory all circulated through sophisticated trade networks managed by literate bureaucracies operating from monumental palaces. But that very interconnection created vulnerability. When one part failed, cascading consequences affected entire system. When Hittite Empire collapsed, it disrupted trade routes. When Cyprus suffered attacks, copper supplies faltered. When Mycenaean palaces burned, Aegean markets disappeared. Each loss weakened entire network until system could no longer function. The Sea Peoples were both symptom and cause of this collapse. Displaced by deteriorating conditions in their homelands, they became raiders seeking resources. Their raids further destabilized fragile systems, accelerating collapse. As more regions fell into chaos, more populations were displaced, creating larger waves of migrants and raiders. It became a self-reinforcing cycle of destruction. But here's the crucial point. Bronze Age collapse wasn't total. Egypt survived intact. Assyria emerged stronger. Some regions experienced continuity rather than catastrophe. Cyprus recovered. Some Levantine cities endured. The collapse was dramatic, but not universal. This reminds us that human societies are resilient. Even catastrophic disruptions can be survived and overcome. The populations displaced by collapse didn't simply vanish, they adapted. The Philistines created thriving coastal city-states that would endure for centuries. The Phoenicians built commercial networks spanning Mediterranean. Greek-speaking peoples who survived collapse eventually created classical Greek civilization. New technologies spread. Iron replaced bronze, not because iron was inherently superior. Early iron tools were often inferior to bronze, but because iron ore was more widely available than copper and tin. When trade networks collapsed and bronze became scarce, iron provided alternative. Necessity drove innovation. Alphabetic writing spread because it was simpler than cuneiform or hieroglyphs. In a world without palace bureaucracies to train scribes in complex scripts, simpler writing systems had advantages. Democratization of literacy followed. Political organization evolved. Without palace bureaucracies, new forms of government emerged. Greek polis with its citizen assemblies, Phoenician merchant republics, Israelite tribal confederations, each adapted to post-collapse conditions, creating political innovations that would influence Western civilization. The Sea Peoples story teaches us several lessons relevant even today. First, highly interconnected systems create vulnerabilities. When everything depends on everything else, failures cascade. Bronze Age collapse shows risks of over-specialization and interdependence without resilience. Second, environmental pressures can trigger social catastrophes. Climate change contributed to Bronze Age collapse. Drought created food shortages. Food shortages created migrations. Migrations created conflicts. Environmental stress plus social vulnerability equals disaster. Third, displaced populations aren't simply victims or villains, they're complex historical actors. Sea Peoples were refugees fleeing disaster. They were raiders seeking survival. They were settlers building new homes. They were all these things simultaneously. Understanding requires nuance. Fourth, collapse creates opportunities. Bronze Age collapse was catastrophic for those who lived through it, but it cleared space for new civilizations to emerge. Without collapse, would we have had classical Greece, Phoenician expansion, Israelite kingdoms? Destruction and creation are intertwined. Fifth, human resilience is remarkable. Despite unprecedented catastrophe, Mediterranean societies recovered. New civilizations emerged. Knowledge was preserved even through dark ages. Humanity adapted and eventually flourished. The Sea Peoples remain mysterious. We don't know exactly where they came from. We don't know their true motivations. We don't know ultimate fates of all groups. But mystery is part of their power. They remind us that history isn't always neat, that great transitions involve chaos, that sometimes world must burn before it can be reborn. The archaeological evidence continues to accumulate. Every year brings new discoveries that refine our understanding. Recent excavations at Ashkelon have revealed Philistine cemetery, providing unprecedented insights into burial practices and population origins. DNA analysis from these burials confirms European ancestry, supporting Aegean origin theories, while also showing rapid integration with local populations. New studies of Bronze Age shipwrecks reveal details of maritime technology and trade networks. Excavations at coastal sites uncover harbour installations and fortifications. Survey projects map settlement patterns during transition from Bronze Age to Iron Age. Each discovery adds pieces to puzzle. But some questions may never be answered definitively. Without Sea People's own texts written in their own languages, we rely on Egyptian descriptions and archaeological interpretation. Egyptian sources are biased. They portray pharaohs as triumphant and enemies as chaotic. Archaeological evidence is fragmentary. We find pottery and ruins, but not motivations and thoughts. We reconstruct what we can. We theorize about rest. We acknowledge uncertainties. This is how history works when dealing with poorly documented periods. We do our best with available evidence while remaining humble about limitations of our knowledge. The legacy of Sea Peoples extends far beyond their immediate historical impact. The name Philistine became a pejorative term in English meaning uncultured person, grossly unfair to sophisticated urban culture that Philistines actually created. The name Palestine derives from Philistine, preserving their memory in modern geography. Phoenician alphabet became foundation for Greek alphabet, which became foundation for Latin alphabet, which you're reading right now. Every letter you read traces back to Phoenician merchants who spread their writing system throughout Mediterranean following Bronze Age collapse. Iron technology that Sea Peoples helped spread revolutionized ancient world. Cheaper and more available than bronze, iron democratized metal tools and weapons. This had profound social consequences. When any farmer could afford iron plow, agricultural productivity increased. When any soldier could be equipped with iron weapons, citizen armies became possible. Iron Age brought social changes as significant as technological ones. The cultural synthesis that occurred in places like Philistia created new forms of civilization blending Aegean, Canaanite, and Egyptian influences. This cross-cultural fertilization produced innovations in pottery, architecture, and urban planning. Similar processes occurred throughout Mediterranean as displaced populations brought their traditions into contact with local cultures. The result was cultural flourishing that laid groundwork for classical civilization. We see this pattern throughout history. Major disruptions, while catastrophic for those living through them, often lead to cultural renaissance. Collapse of Western Roman Empire led to medieval European civilization. Mongol conquests facilitated exchange between East and West. European discovery of Americas transformed global history. The Sea Peoples era fits this pattern. Bronze Age collapse was catastrophe, but it cleared space for classical Mediterranean civilization that would produce philosophy, democracy, drama, epic poetry, and countless other achievements that still influence us today. It doesn't minimize suffering of those who lived through collapse. Real people died, real cities burned, real civilizations vanished. The human cost was immense, but historical perspective allows us to see that from ashes of Bronze Age world emerged new civilizations that would achieve remarkable things. The Sea Peoples played a crucial role in this transition. As destroyers, they helped bring down old order. As settlers, they helped build new one. As cultural intermediaries, they spread technologies and ideas. As survivors of catastrophe, they demonstrated human resilience. Their story resonates because it speaks to universal human experiences: migration and displacement, war and survival, cultural change and adaptation, loss and renewal. These themes recur throughout history. The specific details change, but fundamental patterns remain recognizable. We live in an interconnected world facing environmental pressures. We witness population displacements and cultural conflicts. We navigate rapid technological change. We worry about systemic vulnerabilities. In these ways, our world resembles late Bronze Age Mediterranean more than we might like to admit. The Sea Peoples story offers no simple lessons or easy answers. History never does. But it provides perspective. It reminds us that civilizations are more fragile than they appear, that catastrophic change is possible, that human societies can both cause and survive such changes, that from destruction can come creation. Perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that we're not the first to face such challenges and won't be the last. The Sea Peoples faced their crisis with whatever resources they had. Some groups succeeded in establishing new homes, others disappeared from history, all adapted as best they could to circumstances beyond their control. We inherit world they helped create. We face our own challenges. Like them, we must adapt and persevere. The multidisciplinary approach to studying sea peoples has revealed complexity that earlier generations of scholars couldn't have imagined. Combining archaeology, linguistics, DNA analysis, climate science, metallurgy, naval architecture, and historical analysis creates richer understanding than any single discipline could provide. This integrated approach represents future of ancient historical research. As techniques improve, our understanding deepens. High-resolution climate proxies reveal annual and even seasonal variations in ancient weather patterns. Advanced DNA analysis can identify population movements with increasing precision. New archaeological methods allow recovery of organic materials previously lost. Digital humanities tools enable analysis of vast datasets. Each methodological advance brings new insights. But technology alone isn't enough. We also need better theoretical frameworks for understanding complex historical processes. How do environmental pressures translate into social upheaval? How do political systems respond to existential threats? How do cultures adapt to catastrophic change? These questions require sophisticated social theory alongside empirical evidence. The Sea Peoples research benefits from comparative approaches. Studying other historical collapses, Roman, Mayan, Khmer, reveals common patterns. Examining other migration periods provides context. Analyzing modern refugee situations offers insights into displacement processes. History isn't just about learning what happened. It's about understanding why things happen and how societies respond to challenges. The Sea Peoples era provides case study in systemic collapse and societal transformation. It shows what happens when complex civilizations face multiple simultaneous stresses. It demonstrates how quickly apparently stable systems can unravel. It reveals how displaced populations become agents of historical change. It illustrates cultural resilience and adaptation. These aren't just academic questions, they're relevant to understanding our own world. As we face climate change, resource pressures, political instability, and technological disruption, Bronze Age collapse offers cautionary tale and grounds for hope. Cautionary because it shows how interconnected systems can fail catastrophically. Hopeful because it demonstrates that societies can survive and rebuild even after devastating collapse. The scholarly community studying sea peoples remains vibrant and often contentious. Conferences feature heated debates over pottery chronologies, linguistic connections, and historical interpretations. This is healthy. Disagreement drives research forward. New theories challenge established views. New evidence forces reconsideration of old conclusions. The field evolves. What we knew about sea peoples 30 years ago has been substantially revised. What we know now will likely be revised by future discoveries and analyses. And this is normal in historical research. We work with incomplete evidence and provisional conclusions. We remain open to new interpretations. We acknowledge uncertainties. The public fascination with sea peoples continues unabated. Popular books, documentaries, and online discussions engage audiences worldwide. This reflects deep human interest in mysteries, catastrophes, and lost civilizations. But popular treatments sometimes oversimplify complex issues or present speculative theories as established facts. Responsible scholarship must navigate between academic rigor and public accessibility. Making research available to non-specialists without dumbing it down or sensationalizing it remains an ongoing challenge. The Sea Peoples deserve better than being reduced to simple narrative of mysterious invaders who destroyed Bronze Age world. They were real people facing real crises. They made choices with available information and resources. They succeeded and failed in various measures. They left archaeological and historical traces that we study today. Understanding them requires empathy alongside analysis. What drove these populations to leave their homes? What did they hope to find? What did they fear? How did they organize themselves? How did they make decisions? What values guided their actions? These human questions matter as much as technical details about pottery and metallurgy. The Sea Peoples weren't abstract historical forces. They were mothers and fathers, warriors and craftsmen, leaders and followers. They had hopes and fears, skills and limitations. They were us, facing different circumstances. This human dimension shouldn't be lost in scholarly debates over chronology and ethnicity. The ultimate significance of Sea Peoples lies not in solving mystery of their origins, but in understanding their role in one of history's great transformations. They witnessed end of Bronze Age and beginning of Iron Age. They participated in collapse of old world and creation of new. They carried technologies, traditions, and cultural memories from one era into another. They adapted ancestral practices to new circumstances. They synthesized diverse influences into new cultural forms. In doing this, they helped create a Mediterranean world that would produce classical civilization whose influence extends to our own time. The story of Sea Peoples is ultimately a story about change, about how historical transformations occur, about what happens when old orders collapse and new ones emerge, about human capacity to adapt to catastrophic circumstances. These themes make their story perpetually relevant. Every generation faces changes that seem unprecedented. New technologies disrupt established patterns, environmental shifts force adaptations, political systems transform, cultural norms evolve. Understanding how previous generations navigated such changes provides perspective on our own challenges. The Sea Peoples navigated perhaps the most catastrophic transition in ancient Mediterranean history. They didn't have roadmaps or precedents. They couldn't Google how to survive Bronze Age collapse. They improvised, adapted, and persevered with whatever resources they possessed. Some of their choices worked, others failed. They learned from both. Their success, measured by successful settlement and cultural continuity over subsequent centuries, demonstrates human resilience. Their struggles, documented in destruction layers and Egyptian battle accounts, remind us that such transitions involve real suffering. Both aspects deserve recognition. The archaeological record of Sea Peoples period is record of both catastrophe and adaptation. Destruction layers tell of violence and loss. Settlement evidence tells of rebuilding and innovation. Hybrid pottery styles tell of cultural synthesis. Iron tools tell of technological adaptation. Each artifact contributes to our understanding. Together they paint a picture of civilization in transition, painful, chaotic, but ultimately creative. This creative aspect of collapse often gets overlooked. We focus on what was lost: palaces, literacy, administrative systems, trade networks, but we should also recognize what was gained: new technologies, new political forms, new cultural syntheses. Bronze Age collapse cleared space for classical Mediterranean civilization. The Sea Peoples helped make that transition happen, not through grand design or noble intentions, but through their collective struggles to survive and thrive in a transformed world. In that sense, they were agents of historical progress, even as they were also agents of destruction. The ambiguity is uncomfortable, but historically accurate. The same groups that destroyed Ugarit settled in Philistia. The same warriors who fought Egypt became peaceful merchants and farmers. The same ships that raided coastal cities later carried commercial cargoes. Context and circumstance matter more than simple categories of good or evil. Historical actors respond to their situations as best they can. The Sea People's adaptability deserves recognition. Transitioning from Bronze Age palatial subjects to Iron Age independent settlers required tremendous cultural flexibility. Adopting new technologies like ironworking, learning new languages and customs, integrating with local populations, developing new political systems, creating hybrid cultures, all while maintaining core aspects of cultural identity. This balancing act, preserving identity while adapting to new circumstances, characterizes successful cultural transitions throughout history. The Sea Peoples accomplished this, which is why their descendants thrived. The Philistines created prosperous city-states that endured for centuries. Their pottery, architecture, and urban planning shows successful synthesis of Aegean heritage with Levantine realities. The Phoenicians built commercial empires spanning Mediterranean. Their alphabet became foundation of Western literacy. Their ships reached Atlantic coasts. Their colonies included Carthage, which would challenge Rome centuries later. These successes built on foundations laid during Sea Peoples' period, when displaced populations established themselves in new homes and adapted their traditions to changed circumstances. The transformation wasn't easy or painless. Archaeological evidence shows violence, destruction, and cultural disruption, but it ultimately proved successful. The Mediterranean world that emerged from Bronze Age collapse achieved remarkable things: classical Greece philosophy and democracy, Phoenician commercial networks, Israelite monotheism. These developments occurred in a world shaped by Sea Peoples' era. Not because Sea Peoples intended such outcomes, they didn't, but because historical transformations create opportunities as well as challenges. The Sea Peoples' story thus becomes a story about how history actually works, not through grand designs or inevitable progress, not through simple narratives of heroes and villains, but through complex interactions of environmental pressures, technological changes, political developments, cultural adaptations, and countless individual decisions. History emerges from these interactions. It's messy, contingent, and unpredictable, but it's also comprehensible if we approach it with appropriate tools and perspectives. The scholarly study of Sea Peoples provides those tools and perspectives for understanding this crucial transition in ancient Mediterranean history. As we conclude this exploration of Sea Peoples, several key points deserve emphasis. First, they remain genuinely mysterious despite centuries of research. We don't know their origins with certainty. We can't fully explain their motivations. We don't understand all aspects of their organization. This mystery isn't failure of scholarship. It reflects limitations of available evidence. We work with fragmentary archaeological remains and biased textual sources. We do remarkably well with what we have, but perfect knowledge isn't achievable. Second, they played a crucial role in one of history's great transitions. Bronze Age Mediterranean collapse between 1200 and 1150 BC reshaped ancient world. Sea Peoples were both symptom and cause of this transformation. Understanding them helps us understand broader collapse processes. Third, they demonstrate human adaptability. Displaced from homelands by climate change, political upheaval, or other pressures, they successfully established new settlements in foreign lands. They adapted technologies, created hybrid cultures, and built enduring civilizations. This adaptability offers a hopeful message about human resilience. Fourth, their story complicates simple narratives. They were raiders and settlers, destroyers and builders, foreigners and natives. Such complexity reflects historical reality better than simplistic categorizations. Understanding requires embracing ambiguity and nuance. Fifth, their legacy extends to present day. Alphabetic writing spread by Phoenicians. Iron technology they helped disseminate. Cultural syntheses they participated in. Place names like Palestine. These influences persist millennia later. History isn't just about past, it shapes our present. The study of sea peoples continues evolving. New excavations uncover new evidence, new analytical techniques provide new insights, new theoretical frameworks suggest new interpretations. This dynamism ensures the field remains vital and relevant. Future research will likely focus on several key areas. Expanded DNA analysis of ancient populations may clarify migration patterns and ethnic origins. Improved climate modeling may better link environmental pressures to social disruptions. Systematic survey and excavation programs may reveal previously unknown settlement patterns. Comparative studies with other historical collapses may identify common causal factors and response patterns. Each avenue of research promises to deepen understanding while likely raising new questions. This is normal in historical research. Answers generate questions. Understanding reveals complexity. Knowledge expands awareness of what we don't know. The process continues indefinitely. For students and enthusiasts interested in sea peoples, the field offers rich opportunities. Archaeological excavations continue at key sites. Archives contain unstudied materials. New analytical techniques enable fresh approaches to old evidence. Interdisciplinary collaboration brings new perspectives. The mystery endures, investigation continues, and understanding deepens incrementally. What can modern world learn from sea people's story? Several lessons seem relevant. Complex interconnected systems create vulnerabilities. Environmental pressures trigger social disruptions. Displaced populations become agents of historical change. Cultural adaptation enables survival. Catastrophic collapses can lead to creative transformations. Human resilience enables recovery from devastating setbacks. These aren't just ancient history lessons, they're insights relevant to contemporary challenges. As we face climate change, political instability, technological disruption, and social transformation, Bronze Age collapse offers both warning and reassurance. Warning because it demonstrates how quickly complex civilizations can unravel when multiple stresses coincide. Reassurance because it shows that societies can survive, adapt, and eventually flourish even after catastrophic disruptions. But the Sea Peoples navigated one of history's greatest transitions. They didn't have our knowledge or technology. They faced challenges we can barely imagine. Yet they persevered. Their descendants created civilizations that would shape Western history for millennia. We inherit world they helped create. We face our own challenges and transitions. Like them, we must adapt and persevere. Like them, we possess resilience and creativity to navigate uncertain futures. Their story, told through fragmentary pottery, ruined cities, and biased texts, reminds us that humanity has weathered catastrophes before and will again. The specific circumstances change, but fundamental human capacities for adaptation, innovation, and survival remain constant. This is perhaps ultimate lesson of sea peoples. Not about specific historical events or archaeological details, but about human nature and historical processes, about how societies change, how cultures adapt, how people survive catastrophes and build new worlds from ruins of old. The mystery of sea peoples will likely never be completely solved, but the attempt to understand them teaches us much about ancient world and about ourselves, and so we return to where we began. That desperate naval battle in 1177 BC when Egypt made its last stand against Sea People's coalition. Ramses III's victory preserved Egyptian independence but couldn't restore Bronze Age world that was already lost. The great empires had fallen, the palace systems had collapsed, the trade networks had disintegrated, the literacy had been lost. Bronze Age Mediterranean civilization was gone forever. But from its ashes emerged something new. The Iron Age brought new technologies, new political systems, new cultural forms. The displaced population settled in new homes, adapted their traditions to new circumstances, creating hybrid cultures that would flourish for centuries. The Philistines built prosperous city-states. The Phoenicians created commercial networks spanning Mediterranean. Greek-speaking survivors eventually founded classical civilization. The ancient Near East was transformed. This transformation, painful, chaotic, violent, nevertheless proved historically productive. It cleared away old structures, allowing new ones to emerge. It spread technologies and ideas across regions. It mixed populations and cultures, creating new syntheses. It forced innovations and adaptations. Not all changes were positive. Much was lost that would never be recovered. The administrative sophistication of Bronze Age palace bureaucracies, the artistic achievements of Mycenaean civilization, the commercial complexity of international trade networks, the cultural achievements of Hittite Empire, these and more vanished during collapse. But history moves forward, not backward. The Iron Age Mediterranean that emerged couldn't recreate Bronze Age world, but it created something different and equally remarkable. Classical Greek philosophy, Phoenician alphabet, Israelite monotheism. These achievements of Iron Age would shape Western civilization for millennia. The Sea Peoples participated in this transformation. As raiders, they helped destroy old order. As settlers, they helped build new one. As cultural intermediaries, they spread innovations. As survivors, they demonstrated resilience. Their true identity may remain mysterious. Their exact origins may never be proven. Their ultimate motivations may stay obscure. But their historical significance is clear. They stand at crucial transition point between Bronze Age and Iron Age, between palace bureaucracies and city-states, between bronze and iron, between one world and another. Subscribe to Flow of History to explore more epic historical transformations, from the collapse of Rome to the Mongol conquests to the fall of Constantinople, where old worlds ended and new ones began, where mysterious peoples emerged from chaos to reshape civilizations, where human adaptability and resilience turned catastrophe into opportunity, demonstrating that history's greatest transitions, though painful for those living through them, often clear space for innovations that reshape human civilization in ways that continue influencing our world today. The Sea Peoples destroyed Bronze Age world, but they also helped birth the Iron Age Mediterranean that would produce democracy, philosophy, and alphabetic literacy. They were both ending and beginning, both destroyers and creators, both mystery and revelation. Their ships sailed into history 3 millennia ago, bearing strange names and unknown origins. They fought the greatest battles of ancient world. They toppled empires and founded new nations. They transformed technologies and mixed cultures. Then they vanished into new identities, leaving only ruins, pottery shards, and Egyptian inscriptions to mark their passage. But their legacy endures. Every time you read alphabetic text, invented by descendants of Sea Peoples, every time you use iron tools, technology they spread, every time you think about Bronze Age collapse, they're there. The mysterious peoples from the sea who destroyed a world and built another. The raiders who became settlers, the destroyers who became creators. The Sea Peoples, agents of history's greatest transformation. Their story is our story. Their challenges echo our own. Their resilience inspires our hope. The Bronze Age fell, the Iron Age rose, and the Sea Peoples sailed through that transition, mysterious and momentous, destructive and creative, leaving us a legacy that shapes our world 3,000 years later. This is the story of the Sea Peoples, a mystery never fully solved, a catastrophe never fully understood, a transformation never forgotten. From chaos came order, from destruction came creation, from bronze came iron, from old worlds came new. The Sea Peoples witnessed it all, participated in it all, and left us wondering about it all. Their mystery endures, their legacy persists, their story continues to fascinate, and perhaps that's how it should be. Some historical mysteries are more valuable unsolved, reminding us that the past, like the future, holds surprises we cannot predict, changes we cannot control, and transformations we can only navigate with courage, adaptability, and hope.